Black and white thinking is the tendency to see things in absolute terms. Something is either good or bad, right or wrong, a success or a failure. There is no in-between. This way of thinking oversimplifies the world and creates unnecessary stress. Life is full of complexity, but black and white thinking ignores that. It forces people into rigid categories, making it difficult to adapt to new situations or learn from mistakes. A common example of black and white thinking appears in personal relationships. I'd love to invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's incredible to think about how we're all connected through these stories and ideas. If you enjoy these thought-provoking explorations, consider subscribing to Tired Thinker so we can keep bringing you reflective narratives. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your imagination drift as we delve into the mind-boggling paradoxes and mysteries. Someone might believe that if a friend cancels plans, it means they don't care. The reality is usually more complicated. The friend may be exhausted, overwhelmed, or dealing with personal issues. But in a black and white mindset, these nuances don't matter. The person being canceled on feels rejected and may decide the friendship is over. This reaction can harm relationships and create distance where none was needed. Work and school are other areas where this thinking can cause problems. A student who gets one bad grade might assume they are stupid or incapable. A professional who makes a mistake in a presentation might believe they are terrible at their job. Instead of seeing a setback as one part of a larger journey, black and white thinking turns it into a defining moment. It convinces people that failure in one area means failure overall. This can lead to discouragement and a fear of trying again. Self-perception also suffers under this way of thinking. People may categorize themselves as either successful or worthless, attractive or ugly, capable or incompetent. If something doesn't fit perfectly into the good category, it automatically falls into the bad one. This can lead to self-criticism and low confidence. Someone who believes they must be perfect in order to be worthwhile will struggle with even small mistakes. They might avoid challenges because anything less than perfection feels like failure. Decision-making becomes difficult when someone sees only two options. In reality, most situations have many possibilities. A person considering a career change might think they must either stay in their current job forever or take a huge risk and quit immediately. They may not consider alternatives like researching new opportunities, taking night classes, or gradually transitioning to a new field. This kind of limited thinking prevents growth and keeps people stuck in situations that don't serve them. Black and white thinking often shows up in emotional responses. If someone wakes up feeling sad, they might decide the entire day is ruined. If they have an argument with a partner, they might assume the relationship is broken. They don't allow room for emotions to shift or for problems to be resolved over time. This creates unnecessary suffering. Emotions are temporary, but black and white thinking treats them as permanent. Social issues and opinions can also suffer from this mindset. People often divide the world into us and them, assuming that one side is entirely right and the other is entirely wrong. This makes it difficult to have productive conversations or learn from different perspectives. When people refuse to acknowledge nuance, they become rigid in their views. They struggle to see that others may have valid reasons for thinking differently. This can lead to conflict, misunderstanding, and division. In parenting, black and white thinking can create unrealistic expectations. A parent might believe their child is either well-behaved or disobedient, smart or struggling. When a child makes a mistake, the parent might react harshly because they see it as a sign of failure. This can damage the child's confidence and create a fear of making mistakes. Children need space to learn and grow, but black and white thinking removes that flexibility. Health and fitness are also impacted. Someone trying to eat healthier might think they have to be perfect. If they eat one unhealthy meal, they may decide the entire effort is ruined and give up completely. Exercise routines suffer in the same way. If a person misses a workout, they might assume they have failed and stop altogether. This mindset turns small setbacks into major obstacles, making it harder to stay consistent over time. Black and white thinking is often reinforced by the way people talk to themselves. Inner dialogue can become harsh and unforgiving. Someone might tell themselves they are worthless because they made a single mistake. They may feel trapped because they don't recognize alternative solutions. This way of thinking increases stress, anxiety, and feelings of inadequacy. It makes problems seem bigger than they are and removes the ability to see progress over time. Breaking free from this pattern requires practice. The first step is noticing when thoughts become extreme. Phrases like always and never are common signs of black and white thinking. If someone finds themselves saying, "I always fail," or "I'll never get better," they are likely falling into this trap. Recognizing these patterns allows people to challenge them. Instead of accepting extreme thoughts as truth, they can look for evidence that contradicts them. It helps to ask questions that encourage nuance. Instead of assuming a mistake means failure, someone can ask, "What did I learn from this?" Instead of believing a friend is uncaring, they can consider what else might be going on. This shift in thinking creates space for more balanced perspectives. It allows for growth and prevents unnecessary distress. Practicing self-compassion is another important step. Instead of judging themselves harshly, people can remind themselves that mistakes are part of being human. No one is perfect, and expecting perfection only leads to frustration. By allowing room for imperfection, people can build resilience and move forward more easily. Another strategy is looking for middle ground solutions. When faced with a difficult choice, it helps to consider all available options instead of just two extremes. If someone is unhappy in a job, they don't have to choose between staying forever and quitting immediately. They can explore new opportunities while maintaining financial stability. Finding the middle path prevents unnecessary stress and opens up new possibilities. Black and white thinking is a habit, and like any habit, it can be changed. It takes awareness and effort, but shifting to a more flexible mindset can improve relationships, self-esteem, and overall well-being. Recognizing that life is full of shades of gray allows people to navigate challenges with greater ease. By challenging extreme thoughts and embracing nuance, it becomes possible to see the world in a more balanced and realistic way. People often make sense of the world by looking for patterns. The mind takes shortcuts to simplify complex situations. This saves time and effort, but it can also lead to errors in thinking. Overgeneralization happens when a person takes one event and applies it too broadly. Instead of seeing it as a single instance, they treat it as proof of a larger truth. This way of thinking can create unnecessary fear, self-doubt, or frustration. Imagine a student who fails a math test. Instead of seeing it as one bad result, they say, "I'm terrible at math." The mind moves from one failed test to a broad statement about their abilities. A single event turns into an identity. This kind of thinking does not leave room for change. The student may have misunderstood a few questions or needed more time to study. Instead of looking at those details, they assume failure is permanent. A job seeker applies for several positions and does not hear back. They conclude, "No one will ever hire me." The mind jumps from a few rejections to an absolute belief. It does not consider factors like competition, market trends, or the quality of the applications. Instead, it forms a rule that may not be true. If they keep this mindset, they might stop applying altogether. Overgeneralization often appears in relationships. Someone who experiences heartbreak might say, "I will never find love." A bad date turns into a lifelong prediction. The person ignores the idea that relationships take time and effort. Instead, they assume their future is set in stone. This belief can cause them to give up on dating or approach new people with fear and hesitation. Over time, this thinking makes it harder to build connections. This kind of thinking does not just affect individuals. It shapes opinions about the world. A person who gets cut off in traffic might say, "People are so rude these days." They take one driver's actions and apply them to everyone. They ignore the polite drivers they have seen before. Their frustration grows because they believe rudeness is everywhere. This mindset can lead to constant annoyance and a negative view of society. Sometimes, overgeneralization develops from past trauma. A person who experiences betrayal may believe, "I can't trust anyone." The mind tries to protect itself by creating a rule. If trust led to pain before, it might seem safer to avoid trusting anyone again. This reaction makes sense in the moment, but it can cause problems later. It prevents the person from forming healthy relationships. The fear of betrayal keeps them isolated, even when they meet people who are trustworthy. Children often develop overgeneralized thoughts early. A child who struggles with reading might say, "I'm not smart." A few tough moments in school shape their self-image. Instead of seeing intelligence as something that grows, they see it as fixed. This belief can last into adulthood and affect confidence in many areas of life. The child who thinks they are not smart may hesitate to try new things or challenge themselves. Social anxiety often involves overgeneralization. A person who makes an awkward comment in conversation might think, "I always embarrass myself." They replay the moment in their head and see it as proof of a larger truth. They ignore the times they spoke well or made people laugh. The mind focuses on one mistake and stretches it into a rule. This thinking can make social situations feel more intimidating than they are. The workplace is another place where overgeneralization appears. An employee who receives criticism on a project might think, "My boss hates me." They do not consider that feedback is normal and helps people improve. Instead, they turn one critique into a belief about their entire relationship with their boss. This can create unnecessary stress. They might start avoiding their boss or doubting their abilities at work. People also overgeneralize when thinking about their health. Someone who feels tired a few days in a row might think, "I'm always exhausted." They take a short-term experience and turn it into a constant state. This can make them feel worse than they actually are. They might start believing they have no control over their energy levels, which leads to even less motivation to take care of themselves. Overgeneralization can make fears seem larger than they are. A person who has a bad experience flying might say, "Planes are dangerous." They focus on their own fear instead of the facts. They ignore statistics showing air travel is safer than driving. Instead, they use one experience to form a strong belief. This can lead to avoiding flights altogether, even when flying is necessary or convenient. Sometimes overgeneralization shows up in political discussions. A person who disagrees with a politician might say, "Politicians are all corrupt." They take one example and extend it to an entire group. This way of thinking makes it harder to have open conversations. It closes the door to seeing differences between individuals. When people believe broad statements like this, they may stop looking for solutions altogether. Marketing and media often encourage overgeneralization. Advertisements say, "This product will change your life." They take one idea and apply it too broadly. News headlines highlight one crime and suggest, "Crime is out of control." These messages shape the way people see the world. They encourage black and white thinking instead of looking at full pictures. This can lead to fear, disappointment, or false expectations. Breaking free from overgeneralization starts with noticing when it happens. Words like always, never, and everyone are often signs of this thinking trap. A person who says, "I never do anything right," can step back and ask, "Is that true?" They might remember times when they succeeded. This simple step creates space for a more balanced view. Looking at details helps challenge overgeneralization. A person who thinks, "I always fail at tests," can check their past grades. They might find times when they did well. Even if they have struggled before, they can ask what caused those struggles. Maybe they needed better study habits or more sleep. When they focus on specific causes, they gain control over the situation. Perspective matters too. Instead of saying, "I'm bad at math," a student can say, "Math is hard for me right now, but I can improve." Instead of "No one will hire me," a job seeker can say, "I haven't found the right job yet." These small shifts make a big difference. They keep doors open instead of shutting them with rigid beliefs. Other people can help challenge overgeneralization. A friend, teacher, or mentor might see things differently. When someone says, "I will never find love," a friend can remind them of past relationships or point out qualities that make them a good partner. Outside perspectives help break rigid thinking. Mindfulness is another tool. Paying attention to thoughts without reacting immediately makes it easier to notice patterns. When a negative belief appears, taking a moment to question it can prevent it from taking hold. Asking, "Is this always true?" or "What are other ways to see this?" can shift thinking. Avoiding overgeneralization does not mean ignoring problems. it means looking at them with accuracy. Instead of assuming one setback defines everything, breaking it down into smaller parts helps create realistic solutions. A single test, job rejection, or awkward moment does not define a person's entire life. Recognizing this creates space for growth and change. Catastrophizing happens when a person assumes the worst possible outcome in a situation, even when the facts do not support such a conclusion. This pattern of thinking makes minor setbacks feel like disasters and creates unnecessary stress. It is a cognitive distortion that fuels anxiety, prevents logical decision-making, and can lead to avoidance of everyday responsibilities. A person engaging in this thought process often misinterprets events, seeing them as far worse than they actually are. They might believe that a single mistake at work will lead to being fired, or that one awkward conversation means a relationship is doomed. These thoughts spiral, leading to an overwhelming sense of fear and helplessness. The mind leaps from an initial concern to a catastrophic prediction without considering alternative explanations or realistic probabilities. Imagine someone is running late for an important meeting. Instead of acknowledging the delay and finding a way to handle the situation, they start thinking that being late will anger their boss. From there, they convince themselves that this anger will result in a bad performance review, which will then lead to termination. Finally, they imagine that losing their job will mean financial ruin. In reality, the boss might not even notice or might be understanding about the delay. But the catastrophizing thought pattern turns a small issue into a life-altering disaster in the person's mind. Another example involves health concerns. Someone experiencing a minor headache might immediately jump to the conclusion that they have a brain tumor. They ignore common explanations, such as dehydration or stress, and instead focus on the worst-case scenario. They might start researching symptoms online, which only confirms their fears. Each small symptom seems like evidence of a life-threatening illness, even though no medical professional has given a diagnosis. This cycle creates unnecessary panic and stress, sometimes leading to frequent doctor visits or medical tests that are not needed. Catastrophizing also affects relationships. A person who sends a text and does not receive an immediate response might assume that the other person is angry, uninterested, or planning to end the relationship. Instead of considering that the recipient might be busy or distracted, they assume the worst. This can lead to unnecessary conflict, as the catastrophizer might confront the person or withdraw emotionally before even understanding the actual situation. This thinking pattern often starts early in life. Children who experience criticism or unpredictable consequences may learn to expect the worst as a defense mechanism. If a child grows up in an environment where mistakes lead to severe punishment, they may develop a habit of assuming that every mistake will result in major consequences. This belief follows them into adulthood, shaping their reactions to challenges and failures. Social media and news consumption can reinforce catastrophizing. The constant exposure to alarming headlines and worst-case scenarios can make the world seem more dangerous than it actually is. When people see extreme examples of failures or tragedies, they might start believing that similar events will happen to them. This can lead to a heightened state of anxiety, where even minor setbacks feel like precursors to disaster. People who catastrophize often struggle with decision-making. They hesitate to take risks because they fear the worst possible outcome. This can lead to missed opportunities, stagnation, and regret. A person might avoid applying for a new job because they fear rejection, assuming that if they fail, they will never find another opportunity. Similarly, they might avoid social situations because they believe they will embarrass themselves, leading to loneliness and isolation. One reason catastrophizing is so powerful is that it feels real in the moment. The brain treats imagined worst-case scenarios as actual threats, triggering a stress response. This can lead to physical symptoms like a racing heart, shortness of breath, or stomach discomfort. These symptoms reinforce the belief that something terrible is happening, creating a vicious cycle of anxiety and distress. Breaking the cycle of catastrophizing requires conscious effort. One effective strategy is questioning the thought process. When a worst-case scenario pops into the mind, asking, "What evidence do I have for this belief?" can help. Often, The answer reveals that there is little or no factual basis for the fear. Another helpful question is, what are some alternative explanations? This can help shift focus away from extreme negative outcomes and toward more balanced possibilities. Another approach involves looking at past experiences. Many people who catastrophize realize that their past fears did not come true or were not as bad as they imagined. Recognizing this pattern can help in the present moment. If someone recalls a time when they feared the worst, but things turned out fine, they can use that memory to challenge their current fears. Developing a habit of realistic thinking takes time. Writing down thoughts and examining them logically can help create distance from the immediate emotional reaction. Keeping a record of how past situations actually unfolded compared to how they were feared to unfold can be an eye-opening exercise. Over time, this practice can weaken the grip of catastrophic thinking and encourage a more measured response to stress. Physical relaxation techniques can also help. When the body is tense, it sends signals to the brain that something is wrong. Deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, or short walks can help reduce physical stress and make it easier to think clearly. When the body is calm, the mind is less likely to spiral into extreme fears. Limiting exposure to fear-inducing content can also make a difference. Watching distressing news or engaging with social media discussions that amplify fear can reinforce catastrophic thinking. Being mindful of what information is consumed and how it affects mood can help reduce unnecessary anxiety. Setting boundaries around news consumption, such as only checking headlines once a day, can help create a more balanced perspective. Talking to a trusted friend or therapist can provide another perspective. Sometimes, voicing fears out loud makes them seem less powerful. A supportive listener can help by offering reassurance, pointing out flaws in catastrophic thinking, and suggesting alternative ways to view a situation. Professional therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, can be particularly effective in addressing this pattern. Building resilience against catastrophizing involves small, consistent changes in thinking habits. Practicing gratitude and focusing on positive aspects of life can help counterbalance the habit of expecting the worst. Keeping a journal of daily successes, no matter how small, can shift attention away from potential failures and toward what is going well. Over time, this shift in focus can help reduce the tendency to magnify worst-case scenarios. Recognizing and addressing catastrophizing can lead to significant improvements in mental well-being. When people stop assuming the worst, they free themselves from unnecessary stress and anxiety. They can approach challenges with greater confidence and make decisions based on reality rather than fear. This shift allows for a more balanced and fulfilling life, where setbacks are seen as temporary obstacles rather than insurmountable disasters. Minimization happens when someone downplays their own achievements, emotions, or problems. It can make good things seem unimportant and bad things seem not worth addressing. This kind of thinking distorts reality by making experiences seem smaller or less significant than they actually are. People who minimize may believe they are being humble or realistic, but in reality, they are invalidating their own experiences. A common example of minimization is brushing off compliments. Imagine someone spends weeks working on a project, putting in long hours and extra effort. When a coworker praises them for their dedication, they respond with, "It was nothing, really." They might think they are being modest, but in truth, they are diminishing the hard work they put in. Over time, this habit can make them believe their efforts don't matter, leading to lower self-esteem and a lack of motivation. Minimization also appears when people downplay their emotions. Someone who feels upset or hurt might tell themselves, "I shouldn't be feeling this way," or "other people have it worse." While it's true that others may face difficulties, that doesn't make personal feelings any less valid. By consistently minimizing emotions, a person might stop recognizing when they need support. They might also struggle to set boundaries because they convince themselves their discomfort is not a big deal. This thinking trap can affect mental health. When someone dismisses their struggles, they might not seek help when they need it. A person dealing with anxiety might say, "I'm just overreacting," rather than acknowledging that their worries are overwhelming. Someone who experiences persistent sadness might think, I just need to toughen up, instead of considering that they could be dealing with depression. When emotions or struggles are minimized, they don't go away. They just get buried. Over time, they can build up and lead to burnout, resentment, or even more serious mental health challenges. Minimization can also impact personal relationships. If one partner in a relationship constantly dismisses their own needs, it can create an imbalance. For example, if one person always says, "It's fine, I don't mind," even when they do mind, the other person might not realize there's a problem. Over time, the person minimizing their feelings may feel unappreciated or unheard, but because they have consistently downplayed their emotions, their partner may have no idea there was ever an issue. This can lead to frustration, resentment, and breakdowns in communication. Another way minimization appears in relationships is when someone dismisses hurtful behavior. A friend might frequently make rude jokes, but instead of addressing the problem, the person on the receiving end might think, "They don't mean anything by it," or "I'm probably just being too sensitive." By minimizing the impact of unkind behavior, they allow it to continue. Over time, they may start to feel worse about themselves or avoid expressing their feelings altogether. Minimization can also occur in the workplace. Someone who is constantly overworked but tells themselves it's not that bad might keep taking on more responsibility until they reach burnout. They might ignore their own exhaustion, thinking other people work harder, even if their workload is already unreasonable. By minimizing their stress, they make it harder for themselves to advocate for better balance. This can lead to frustration, decreased productivity, and eventually job dissatisfaction. Physical health can also suffer due to minimization. Some people downplay symptoms of illness or injury, telling themselves it's nothing serious, or "I don't want to bother anyone." This can lead them to ignore medical issues that could have been treated more easily if addressed earlier. A person experiencing frequent headaches might assume they're just stressed instead of considering that there could be an underlying medical condition. Someone feeling constant fatigue might tell themselves it's normal rather than checking for potential health concerns. By minimizing these issues, they might delay seeking medical help until the problem becomes more severe. Minimization is often learned. A person who grew up in an environment where emotions were dismissed might develop this habit as a way to cope. If a child is regularly told, "It's not that bad," or "Stop making a big deal out of things," they might internalize the belief that their experiences aren't important. As they grow up, they may struggle to express emotions, advocate for themselves, or recognize when they need help. This pattern can continue into adulthood, making it difficult to break free from the cycle. Another reason people minimize is to avoid conflict. If speaking up has led to arguments in the past, they might decide it's easier to keep quiet and downplay their own feelings. Someone who has experienced rejection after expressing their needs might convince themselves those needs aren't important. While this can temporarily avoid tension, it doesn't solve the underlying problem. Over time, consistently minimizing emotions can lead to resentment and frustration. Minimization can also be tied to self-worth. Some people believe they don't deserve attention, support, or praise. If they have internalized the idea that they are not important, they might downplay their achievements or struggles as a way to reinforce that belief. They may feel uncomfortable accepting compliments, thinking, "I don't deserve this." They might hesitate to ask for help, assuming, "I shouldn't bother anyone." This mindset can prevent them from recognizing their own value and receiving the support they need. Breaking the habit of minimization starts with awareness. Noticing when it happens is the first step toward changing the pattern. If someone catches themselves dismissing their emotions or achievements, they can pause and ask, "Is this really true? Am I being fair to myself?" Practicing self-validation can help shift the habit. Instead of saying, "It's not a big deal," they can try, "This matters to me, and that's okay." Accepting compliments without deflecting is another way to challenge minimization. Instead of responding with, "Oh, it was nothing," a simple, "Thank you, I appreciate that," acknowledges the effort put in. Similarly, recognizing emotions without judgment can help. Rather than thinking, "I shouldn't feel this way," a person can remind themselves, "My feelings are valid." Speaking up about needs and boundaries is another important step. If someone frequently minimizes their discomfort in relationships, they can start practicing small changes. Instead of saying, "It's fine," when it's not, they can try, "I'd actually prefer something different." While it may feel uncomfortable at first, over time, it builds confidence and strengthens communication. Asking for help when needed is another way to break the pattern. If someone is struggling but telling themselves, "I should handle this alone," they can challenge that belief by reaching out. Whether it's talking to a friend, seeking professional support, or simply acknowledging that a problem exists, recognizing that help is available can make a difference. Minimization can be deeply ingrained, especially for those who have been doing it for years. But changing the habit is possible with practice and patience. Recognizing and valuing one's own experiences, emotions, and achievements is not about seeking attention or exaggerating problems. It's about seeing things as they truly are. Magnification makes problems seem bigger than they are. It distorts reality by making setbacks feel like disasters. A small mistake at work turns into a fear of getting fired. A minor disagreement with a friend feels like the end of the relationship. This thinking trap takes a single negative event and blows it out of proportion. The mind fixates on the worst parts and ignores everything else. Imagine someone gives a presentation and stumbles over a few words. Instead of seeing it as a minor slip, they think, "Everyone must think I'm an idiot." They picture people whispering about them, shaking their heads in disappointment. In reality, most people didn't notice or didn't care. But to the person trapped in magnification, it becomes a defining moment of failure. This pattern plays out in different areas of life. In academics, a student gets a low grade on one test and thinks they'll fail the whole course. In relationships, a partner forgets an anniversary and the other assumes they don't care. At work, a small correction from a boss feels like a sign of incompetence. Each situation is exaggerated until it feels overwhelming. Magnification creates anxiety because the brain treats every setback as a crisis. The nervous system reacts as if there's real danger. The heart beats faster, muscles tense up, and thoughts race. Someone waiting for a reply to a text might think, "They must be mad at me," even though the other person could just be busy. The mind takes uncertainty and fills in the blanks with the worst-case scenario. Social situations are common triggers. Someone at a party tells a joke that doesn't get a laugh. Instead of brushing it off, they assume people think they're boring. They replay the moment in their head, making it seem worse each time. The more they dwell on it, the more real it feels. They might even avoid future social events to escape the possibility of feeling that way again. This pattern can also affect health. A person with a mild headache might start thinking it's something serious. They search online and find scary possibilities, like a brain tumor or a stroke. Instead of considering common explanations like dehydration or stress, they focus on the worst outcome. The anxiety from this thought process can even make symptoms feel worse, reinforcing their fear. Perfectionists often struggle with magnification. They set high standards for themselves and see anything less than perfect as failure. A writer getting feedback on their work might fixate on one small criticism, ignoring all the praise. An athlete might focus on one missed shot instead of the great plays they made. Their mind takes one flaw and makes it the whole picture. Magnification can also distort memories. Looking back on past failures, the brain might exaggerate how bad things were. Someone remembering an embarrassing moment from childhood might think, "It was the worst day of my life," even though others barely noticed at the time. The brain reshapes the event, making it seem bigger than it really was. This thinking trap can fuel avoidance. If someone believes a situation will be unbearable, they may avoid it entirely. A student who magnifies their fear of public speaking might refuse to present in class. A person dreading an awkward conversation might put it off indefinitely. The fear of discomfort becomes stronger than the actual experience. Magnification often pairs with other cognitive distortions. Catastrophizing is closely related, where the mind not only exaggerates problems, but also predicts disaster. Emotional reasoning adds another layer, where feelings of fear or embarrassment are taken as proof that something is truly terrible. These distortions work together, making problems seem insurmountable. In daily life, magnification can show up in small ways. A driver getting honked at might think, that person must think I'm the worst driver ever. A person who burns dinner might tell themselves, I can't cook at all. A missed gym session turns into, I'm completely out of shape. The exaggeration turns neutral or minor events into evidence of failure. To challenge magnification, it helps to step back and assess the situation logically, asking questions like, what evidence do I have for this? Or would I see it the same way if it happened to someone else? Can create perspective. Acknowledging that thoughts are not facts can also weaken the power of exaggerated thinking. Reality checks can help. Writing down the fear and then listing alternative explanations can create a clearer picture. If someone thinks, my friend didn't text back because they're mad, they can consider other possibilities. They might be busy, or they could be in a bad mood that has nothing to do with me. Recognizing that the mind tends to jump to extremes can reduce the impact of distorted thoughts. Small steps can make a difference. If someone avoids situations due to magnified fears, gradually facing them can help. A person who avoids speaking in meetings because they think they'll embarrass themselves can start by making small contributions. Over time, they gather evidence that their fears are exaggerated. The more they challenge the distortion, the weaker it becomes. Self-compassion is also key. Many people who struggle with magnification are hard on themselves. They hold themselves to high standards and don't give themselves the same kindness they'd offer a friend. Reminding themselves that mistakes are normal can help reframe negative thoughts. Mindfulness can also counteract magnification. Noticing thoughts without reacting to them reduces their power. Instead of getting swept up in exaggerated worries, a person can recognize them as just thoughts. Observing the mind's tendency to jump to extremes makes it easier to break the pattern. Magnification doesn't disappear overnight, but awareness is the first step. Recognizing when the mind is making something bigger than it is allows for a shift in perspective. With practice, distorted thoughts lose their grip and reality becomes clearer. People often assume they know what others think. They believe they can read minds without proof. This creates problems in relationships, work, and daily life. When someone thinks they know what another person is thinking, they act on assumptions rather than facts. This leads to misunderstandings and unnecessary stress. A person may walk into a room and see two coworkers whispering. Instead of considering different explanations, they immediately think they are talking about me. This belief affects their mood and behavior. They may become defensive, withdraw, or feel angry. None of these reactions are based on actual knowledge. They are based on the false idea that they can read minds. Mind reading can damage friendships. A person sends a text to a friend and does not receive an immediate reply. Instead of assuming the friend is busy, they believe the friend is ignoring them. They might think, they must be mad at me. This assumption leads to hurt feelings and unnecessary conflict. If they reach out and ask, they may learn the friend was just busy. Without asking, they allow the false belief to shape their emotions and actions. In relationships, mind reading creates tension. A person notices their partner seems quieter than usual. They assume their partner is upset with them. Instead of asking, they begin acting distant. The partner, noticing the change, reacts in kind. Now, both feel disconnected, even though no real problem existed. The relationship suffers because of an assumption. If the person had simply asked, they could have avoided the entire situation. At work, mind reading leads to self-doubt and anxiety. An employee presents an idea in a meeting. Their boss does not immediately respond. The employee assumes the boss dislikes the idea. They spend the rest of the meeting feeling insecure. Later, they learn the boss was distracted by another issue. Their assumption had no basis, yet it affected their confidence. If they had asked for feedback, they would have received clarity. Mind reading affects social interactions. A person enters a gathering and sees someone look in their direction. They assume the person dislikes them or is judging them. This belief shapes their behavior, making them hesitant to engage. In reality, the person may have been looking absent-mindedly. The assumption distorts reality and affects the person's ability to connect with others. This pattern often starts early. A child may notice a teacher frowning. Instead of thinking the teacher is focused on something else, They assume the teacher is disappointed in them. They carry this belief throughout the day, affecting their confidence. If they had asked, they might have learned the teacher had a headache or was thinking about something unrelated. The habit of mind reading continues into adulthood, influencing behavior and emotions in harmful ways. Social media amplifies mind reading. Someone posts a picture and does not receive as many likes as they expected. They assume people dislike them or find them boring. Instead of seeing social media engagement as random, they take it as a personal judgment. They feel rejected, even though there is no real evidence that anyone thought about them at all. This false belief can lead to sadness or self-doubt. Mind reading is also common in professional settings. An employee receives a short email from their manager. Instead of seeing it as neutral, they assume it means their work is unsatisfactory. They spend the rest of the day worrying. Later, they find out the manager was simply busy and had no negative thoughts about them. The unnecessary stress came from their assumption, not reality. Even in public, mind reading affects behavior. A person walks past a group of people who start laughing. They assume the laughter is about them. This thought makes them feel embarrassed or insecure. In reality, the laughter could be about something unrelated. The assumption distorts the situation and causes unnecessary discomfort. The problem with mind reading is that it often confirms existing fears. If someone already feels insecure, they will assume others see them that way too. They will misinterpret neutral behaviors as negative. A friend being quiet will seem like disapproval. A coworker not responding quickly will seem like rejection. These thoughts reinforce anxiety and self-doubt. People who struggle with social anxiety often engage in mind reading. They assume others are judging them, even when there is no evidence. They interpret normal interactions as signs of dislike. A person glancing away during a conversation seems like boredom. A short response in a text seems like annoyance. These assumptions make social situations feel overwhelming. Mind reading is not only inaccurate, but it also limits communication. Instead of asking questions, people act on their assumptions. If a person believes a friend is upset with them, they might withdraw. If they had asked, they might have learned the friend was simply having a bad day. By avoiding direct conversation, they allow false beliefs to shape their relationships. Many conflicts arise from mind reading. Someone believes a coworker dislikes them based on a single interaction. They start avoiding that person, creating unnecessary tension. The coworker, noticing the distance, assumes the same in return. Now, both act distant, even though there was no real issue to begin with. A simple conversation could have prevented the problem. Mind reading also affects performance. A student assumes their teacher thinks they are not smart. This belief makes them hesitant to participate in class. Over time, they engage less and less. Their grades suffer, reinforcing their initial belief. If they had asked for feedback, they might have learned the teacher had no negative thoughts about them. The cycle of assumption and inaction holds them back. Breaking the habit of mind reading requires awareness. People must recognize when they are assuming thoughts instead of knowing them. When they notice themselves making an assumption, they should ask themselves if they have evidence. If they do not, they should consider alternative explanations. Asking direct questions is a simple way to prevent mind reading. Instead of assuming a friend is upset, they can ask if something is wrong. Instead of believing a coworker dislikes them, they can engage in conversation. Most of the time, they will learn their assumption was incorrect. This approach prevents misunderstandings and strengthens relationships. Reframing thoughts also helps. If someone believes a friend is ignoring them, they can consider other explanations. Maybe the friend is busy or distracted. Instead of assuming rejection, they can remind themselves that they do not know for sure. This small shift in thinking reduces unnecessary stress. Writing down assumptions can reveal patterns. If someone consistently assumes others dislike them, they can challenge those thoughts. They can ask themselves if their assumptions have ever been proven wrong. Most will find that their fears were unfounded. Recognizing this pattern helps them change their thinking. Observing how others react to different situations can also be useful. If someone notices that a friend does not take things personally, they can learn from that behavior. They can remind themselves that not everything is about them. People have their own thoughts and struggles that have nothing to do with others. Avoiding mind reading improves communication and reduces stress. It allows people to engage with others based on facts rather than assumptions. Relationships become stronger, workplaces become less stressful, and social interactions become easier. Recognizing and challenging these thoughts leads to a clearer, more confident way of thinking. Emotional reasoning happens when people believe their emotions reflect reality. They assume that because they feel something strongly, it must be true. This way of thinking can cause problems in decision-making, relationships, and self-perception. It leads to distorted views of situations, reinforcing negative thoughts and emotions instead of challenging them. When someone relies on emotional reasoning, they struggle to separate feelings from facts. A person experiencing emotional reasoning might think, "I feel useless, so I must be useless." This thought does not consider evidence or logical reasoning. Instead, it treats an emotional state as proof of reality. If someone feels anxious about a work presentation, they might conclude that they are going to fail, even if they are well prepared. The emotion of fear replaces a rational assessment of the situation. Consider a person who wakes up feeling sad. They assume their sadness means something is wrong in their life. They might start looking for reasons to justify the sadness rather than recognizing that emotions can arise without a clear cause. This person might decide they have no friends, that their job is meaningless, or that their future is hopeless. In reality, emotions fluctuate for many reasons, including sleep quality, diet, and daily stressors. But instead of questioning their feelings, they accept them as evidence. Emotional reasoning also affects relationships. A person who feels jealous might assume their partner is cheating. Instead of looking at their partner's actions, they treat their jealousy as proof of betrayal. This can lead to accusations, distrust, and unnecessary conflict. Another example is someone who feels unloved and assumes their friends do not care about them. Even if their friends regularly check in and show support, the person dismisses those actions because their feelings tell them otherwise. Anxiety often fuels emotional reasoning. A person who fears social situations might believe they are awkward and that others dislike them. They rely on their discomfort as evidence instead of considering how people actually respond to them. If they feel nervous during a conversation, they assume they must have said something wrong, even if no one reacted negatively. This belief can make social anxiety worse over time. Instead of recognizing that nerves are normal, they conclude they are socially incompetent. Depression also thrives on emotional reasoning. A person who feels hopeless may decide their situation will never improve. They do not look at past successes or possibilities for change. They assume that because they feel stuck, they are stuck. This can prevent them from seeking help or making positive changes. They might say, "I feel like a failure, so I must be one," without considering their accomplishments or the temporary nature of emotions. People struggling with self-doubt often use emotional reasoning against themselves. If they feel incapable, they assume they are incapable. They ignore evidence of their abilities and let their emotions dictate their self-worth. Someone who feels overwhelmed at work might believe they are bad at their job, even if they have a history of success. Their temporary frustration blinds them to reality. Fear is another strong driver of emotional reasoning. If someone feels scared, they assume danger is present. This can lead to avoidance behaviors. For example, a person with a fear of flying might feel anxious before a flight and conclude it must be unsafe. Instead of examining airline safety statistics, they trust their fear and decide not to travel. This reinforces the fear rather than challenging it. Guilt also plays a role in emotional reasoning. A parent might feel guilty about working long hours and conclude they are a bad parent. Even if they spend quality time with their children and provide for them, they let guilt override reality. They might make unnecessary sacrifices or blame themselves for things beyond their control. Emotional reasoning can distort body image. A person who feels unattractive might believe they are unattractive, regardless of how others see them. They focus on perceived flaws instead of taking an objective view. This can lead to harmful behaviors like excessive dieting or avoiding social situations. People also use emotional reasoning in conflicts. If someone feels disrespected, they assume the other person intended to be disrespectful. They react based on their feelings instead of considering other explanations. This can escalate minor misunderstandings into major arguments. To counter emotional reasoning, people must learn to separate emotions from facts. This requires questioning thoughts and looking for evidence. If someone thinks, "I feel like a failure," they should ask, "What evidence do I have for this?" They might recall past achievements and realize their emotions are temporary. Writing down thoughts and examining them critically can help break the cycle. Another useful approach is considering alternative explanations. If someone feels ignored, they might assume a friend is upset with them. Instead, they should ask, could there be another reason they haven't responded? They might realize the friend is busy or dealing with personal issues. This shift in thinking prevents unnecessary stress and miscommunication. Practicing mindfulness can also reduce emotional reasoning. Mindfulness encourages observing emotions without judgment. Instead of reacting to feelings as if they are facts, people learn to acknowledge them and let them pass. This helps prevent impulsive decisions based on temporary emotions. Another strategy is keeping a record of past experiences. People who struggle with emotional reasoning often forget times when their feelings did not match reality. A journal can serve as a reminder that emotions are not always accurate predictors. For example, someone who frequently fears failure might write down moments when they succeeded despite feeling doubtful. Over time, this builds a stronger connection to reality. Developing a habit of asking trusted others for perspective can also help. If someone feels worthless, they can check in with a friend or mentor. Outside perspectives provide a more balanced view. This does not mean seeking constant reassurance, but rather getting a reality check when emotions distort thinking. Challenging emotional reasoning takes practice. The brain naturally relies on emotions, especially in stressful situations. But with effort, people can learn to step back and evaluate their thoughts. Recognizing that emotions are not facts allows for better decision-making, healthier relationships, and a more balanced self-view. Over time, questioning emotional reasoning becomes a habit, leading to a clearer, more rational approach to life. Selective abstraction happens when someone focuses only on the negative details of a situation while ignoring the positive aspects. This type of thinking can distort reality and make problems seem bigger than they are. It often leads to stress, anxiety, and self-doubt because it shapes a worldview where only the worst parts of an experience matter. Imagine a student who takes a test and scores 85 out of 100. Most would see this as a good grade, but someone engaging in selective abstraction might focus only on the 15 points they lost. They might ignore the fact that they did well on most questions. Instead of feeling satisfied with their performance, they dwell on their mistakes and convince themselves they are not smart enough. This pattern of thinking can become a habit, making it hard to appreciate success and progress. Another example happens in the workplace. A professional gives a presentation and receives mostly positive feedback, but one person criticizes a small aspect of the talk. Instead of recognizing the overall success, the person fixates on the negative comment. They replay it in their mind, wondering what they did wrong and whether they embarrassed themselves. This way of thinking can make them anxious about future presentations and lead them to believe they are not good at public speaking, even though most of their audience responded well. Selective abstraction often appears in social situations. Someone at a party might notice one person not engaging with them while ignoring the many others who are friendly and interested. They might walk away feeling disliked or awkward, even though the majority of interactions were positive. This way of filtering experiences reinforces feelings of rejection and social anxiety. In relationships, this pattern can cause unnecessary tension. A person may focus only on the times their partner forgets to do something thoughtful while overlooking all the ways their partner shows care and support. A single forgotten anniversary or a missed phone call can seem like proof that their partner does not care, even though the relationship is otherwise healthy. Over time, this type of thinking can create resentment and distance. People who engage in selective abstraction often struggle with self-esteem. They might discount compliments, brushing them off as meaningless while taking criticism to heart. If they receive 10 positive comments and one negative one, they focus only on the criticism and let it define their self-worth. This can lead to feelings of inadequacy and a belief that they are not good enough, no matter how much evidence suggests otherwise. This way of thinking can also affect personal goals. Imagine someone training for a marathon. They complete a long run but struggle in the last few miles. Instead of recognizing their endurance and progress, they dwell on their fatigue and see themselves as a failure. This mindset can make it hard to stay motivated because they only see what went wrong instead of how much they have improved. Over time, they might lose confidence and give up on their goal. Health concerns often trigger selective abstraction. Someone experiencing mild symptoms might fixate on the worst possible explanation, even when doctors assure them there is nothing serious. They may obsess over minor aches, interpreting them as signs of a severe illness, while ignoring other signs of good health. This type of thinking can contribute to anxiety and unnecessary stress. Selective abstraction can also shape how people view the world. Someone who constantly watches negative news stories might start to believe that the world is a dangerous and hopeless place. They may ignore positive events or stories of kindness and progress. This mindset can lead to feelings of helplessness and pessimism. This thinking trap often develops early in life. A child who is frequently criticized but rarely praised may learn to focus only on their mistakes. If a teacher points out errors without also acknowledging successes, the child might start believing they are not good at school. Over time, this habit of focusing on the negative can carry into adulthood, affecting self-perception and overall happiness. Social media can reinforce selective abstraction. People often compare themselves to others by focusing only on the best parts of someone else's life. They see carefully curated photos of vacations, achievements, and celebrations while ignoring the struggles and challenges that are not shared. This can make them feel inadequate because they believe their own life is not as exciting or successful. Breaking free from selective abstraction requires conscious effort. One approach is to challenge negative thoughts by looking at the bigger picture. If someone receives criticism, they can remind themselves of the positive feedback they have received as well. Keeping a journal of daily accomplishments, no matter how small, can help balance out negative thinking. Writing down positive moments forces the mind to recognize them instead of letting them slip away unnoticed. Another strategy is to ask trusted friends or family members for perspective. Often, an outside viewpoint reveals that things are not as bad as they seem. When someone shares their negative thoughts, others can point out the positives they have overlooked. This helps reframe situations in a more balanced way. Mindfulness practices can also help. Being aware of when selective abstraction happens allows people to step back and evaluate their thoughts more objectively. Instead of automatically dwelling on the negative, they can take a moment to consider whether they are seeing the full picture. This habit takes time to develop, but it can make a big difference in reducing stress and anxiety. Cognitive behavioral techniques can be useful in addressing this thinking trap. One approach is to gather evidence for and against a negative belief. If someone thinks they are terrible at their job because of one mistake, they can list their past successes and strengths as counter-evidence. Seeing both sides written down makes it harder for the mind to ignore positive aspects. It also helps to practice gratitude. Making a habit of recognizing and appreciating good things, even small ones, shifts focus away from negativity. Instead of dwelling on what went wrong, people can acknowledge what went right. Over time, this habit rewires thinking patterns and makes positive aspects of life more visible. Avoiding selective abstraction does not mean ignoring problems or pretending everything is perfect. It means seeing situations accurately, with both positives and negatives included. Life is rarely all bad or all good. Recognizing this balance leads to more realistic and less stressful thinking. The goal is not to force positivity, but to avoid unnecessary self-criticism and fear. Selective abstraction can be a deeply ingrained habit, but with practice, it can be changed. Recognizing when it happens is the first step. Once someone is aware of this thinking trap, they can take steps to shift their focus and see a more complete picture of reality. Over time, this leads to greater confidence, less anxiety, and a healthier mindset. Personalization happens when you believe that everything that goes wrong is somehow your fault. You assume responsibility for situations that may have little or nothing to do with you. When someone is upset, you think you caused it. If something doesn't go as planned, you blame yourself, even when external factors played a major role. This way of thinking makes you feel guilty, anxious, and responsible for fixing things that were never in your control to begin with. Imagine a team project at work where a deadline is missed. You immediately think, I should have worked harder, or if I had done more, we wouldn't be in this situation. You ignore the fact that others also had responsibilities, that unexpected issues came up, or that the deadline may have been unrealistic from the start. Instead of seeing it as a shared responsibility, you shoulder all the blame. This kind of thinking also plays out in personal relationships. Suppose a friend seems distant or doesn't respond to a message right away. You start wondering what you did wrong. You replay past conversations, trying to find something you might have said that upset them. You assume they're mad at you, instead of considering that they might be busy, stressed, or dealing with their own personal problems. You make their mood about you, even though you have no real evidence that you caused it. Parents often struggle with personalization. If a child struggles in school, misbehaves, or seems unhappy, a parent might immediately think, I failed them. They ignore the many other influences in their child's life: teachers, friends, personal experiences, or even genetics. Instead of recognizing that parenting is complex and no one has full control over their child's life, they take all the responsibility upon themselves. Personalization also happens in social situations. Suppose you're at a gathering and you make a joke that no one laughs at. You immediately think, they must think I'm boring, or I embarrassed myself. In reality, people might have been distracted, not heard you clearly, or simply not found the joke funny in that moment. But instead of considering these possibilities, you assume the reaction is a direct reflection of your worth. In romantic relationships, personalization can create tension. Imagine your partner comes home from work looking exhausted and barely speaks. Instead of thinking, they had a rough day, you start wondering, did I do something wrong? You start analyzing your recent interactions, trying to find something you said or did that might have upset them. This leads to unnecessary stress and miscommunication because you're assuming responsibility for something that likely has nothing to do with you. Social media amplifies this thinking trap. You send a message and someone doesn't reply right away. You assume they're ignoring you, upset with you, or don't care. You don't consider that they might be busy, overwhelmed, or simply not in the mood to chat. Instead, you take their silence as a personal slight, even though there's no clear evidence that it has anything to do with you. Workplace settings also bring out personalization. If a boss gives constructive criticism, you might think, they don't like me, instead of, they're helping me improve. If a coworker is short with you, you assume they're annoyed with you, rather than considering they might be having a bad day. You make their words and actions about you, rather than recognizing that people have their own reasons for behaving the way they do. This thinking pattern is exhausting. You spend too much time worrying about things you can't control. You feel responsible for how others feel, even when their emotions have nothing to do with you. This leads to guilt, self-doubt, and unnecessary stress. You start tiptoeing around people, trying to avoid upsetting them, even though they might not be upset at all. You carry the emotional burden of others, which makes it hard to focus on your own needs. One reason personalization happens is the need for control. If you believe you caused a problem, then in some way, you also believe you can fix it. Admitting that some things are out of your hands is uncomfortable. It's easier to think, if I had just done something differently, this wouldn't have happened, than to accept that some things happen for reasons beyond your influence. Another reason is low self-esteem. If you already struggle with self-doubt, you're more likely to assume you're the cause of negative situations. You interpret neutral or unrelated events as evidence that you've done something wrong. You believe that if something goes wrong, it must be because of you. Breaking free from personalization starts with awareness. When you catch yourself taking responsibility for something, ask, what evidence do I have that this is my fault? Look at the situation from an outsider's perspective. If a friend told you the same story, would you blame them? Often, you'll realize you're being much harder on yourself than you would be on anyone else. Consider alternative explanations. If someone seems upset, ask yourself, what else could be going on in their life? Remind yourself that people's emotions and actions are influenced by many factors, most of which have nothing to do with you. Challenge the idea that you are the cause of every negative situation. Practice separating what you can control from what you can't. You can control how you respond, but you can't control how others feel or act. You can do your best in a situation, but you can't force a perfect outcome. Recognizing this takes a weight off your shoulders. If you find yourself spiraling into self-blame, pause and think about what you would say to a friend in your position. You would likely reassure them that they're not responsible for everything. Try giving yourself the same kindness. It also helps to ask directly rather than assuming. If you think someone is upset because of you, try asking, "Is everything okay?" instead of immediately taking the blame. More often than not, their response will show you that their mood has nothing to do with you. Learning to let go of personalization takes time. It means retraining your brain to see situations in a more balanced way. It means reminding yourself that you are not responsible for everyone else's feelings. It means understanding that people's reactions are about them, not you. Letting go of personalization doesn't mean ignoring accountability. If you genuinely make a mistake, taking responsibility is important, but it means recognizing the difference between what you actually caused and what you're just assuming you caused. It means seeing situations for what they are, rather than through the lens of self-blame. When you stop personalizing everything, life becomes lighter. You stop carrying the weight of things that were never yours to hold. You free yourself from unnecessary guilt and self-doubt. You start seeing yourself as a person who is part of the world, not the sole cause of everything that happens in it. You realize that other people's moods, choices, and actions are influenced by many factors, and you are just one small part of a much bigger picture. People blame themselves for things that are not entirely their fault. They take full responsibility for events they had little or no control over. This type of thinking leads to guilt, shame, and a skewed perception of reality. Instead of seeing a situation as the result of multiple factors, a person engaging in self-blame assumes they are the sole cause of a problem. This habit can be harmful over time, affecting mental health, relationships, and decision-making. Imagine a person who recently lost their job. Instead of recognizing that the company faced financial trouble or that other employees were also laid off, they assume they were let go because they were not good enough. They focus on their mistakes, believing those alone led to the decision. This thinking disregards external factors, such as budget cuts, company restructuring, or economic downturns. The person feels worthless and incompetent, even if they performed well. Another example involves a parent whose child struggles in school. They believe they failed as a parent. They think they should have done more, taught their child better study habits, or pushed harder. They do not consider that the child might be facing difficulties unrelated to parenting, such as a learning disability, personal struggles, or the teaching methods at school. The parent internalizes the problem, feeling guilty and inadequate even when they have done their best. Self-blame often starts early. A child who grows up in a household where they are criticized for small mistakes may learn to blame themselves for everything that goes wrong. If a parent frequently says, "You always mess things up," or "This is your fault," the child absorbs this message. Over time, they develop an automatic response of blaming themselves whenever anything bad happens, even in adulthood. They internalize failure as a personal flaw rather than something that happens to everyone. People who experience trauma also struggle with self-blame. A person who was in an abusive relationship may believe they caused the abuse. They tell themselves that if they had acted differently, the other person would not have hurt them. They focus on what they did wrong instead of recognizing that the abuser made the choice to harm them. This self-blame keeps them stuck in guilt, preventing them from healing or seeing the reality of the situation. Some people blame themselves for the emotions of others. If a friend is in a bad mood, they assume they must have done something wrong. If their partner seems distant, they believe they caused it. They do not consider that the other person might be dealing with their own issues. This belief makes relationships stressful. Instead of recognizing that emotions are complex and influenced by many factors, they take responsibility for how others feel. Perfectionism often fuels self-blame. When someone holds themselves to unrealistic standards, they feel they should have prevented every mistake or problem. They believe they should always say the right thing, make the right decisions, and anticipate every possible issue. When reality does not match these expectations, they blame themselves for not being perfect. They focus on what they could have done differently, even when the outcome was out of their control. The workplace is another setting where self-blame appears. An employee who is part of a failed project might assume they are the reason for the failure. Even if the project had multiple people involved and several external challenges, they focus on their role. They replay every decision they made, thinking about what they should have done instead. They ignore the bigger picture, such as unclear goals, limited resources, or lack of team coordination. This kind of thinking increases stress and makes them hesitant to take on new challenges. Health issues can also lead to self-blame. A person who gets sick may believe they brought it upon themselves. They think, "I should have eaten better," or "I should have exercised more," even when their illness was not entirely preventable. Someone who experiences mental health struggles might blame themselves for not being strong enough, rather than recognizing that depression, anxiety, and other conditions have biological and environmental causes. This thinking makes it harder to seek help because they feel they should handle everything on their own. Grief can trigger self-blame. After losing a loved one, people often replay their last interactions, wondering if they could have done something differently. They ask themselves if they should have called more, visited more often, or said something different. They assume they had more control over the situation than they actually did. This adds unnecessary pain to an already difficult experience. It prevents them from processing their emotions in a healthy way and can keep them stuck in regret. Cultural and societal influences play a role in self-blame. Some societies emphasize personal responsibility to an extreme degree. Messages such as, "You control your own destiny and you get what you deserve," can make people feel like failures when things go wrong. While personal responsibility is important, it does not account for external factors that impact life events. When someone internalizes these messages, they may struggle to acknowledge that some things are beyond their control. Social media can amplify self-blame. People see carefully curated versions of others' lives, filled with success, happiness, and achievement. If they experience setbacks, they assume the problem lies within themselves. They compare their struggles to the highlight reels of others, thinking, "Why can't I get my life together?" They do not see the full picture, which includes difficulties and failures. This distorted comparison leads to unnecessary self-criticism. Breaking the cycle of self-blame requires shifting perspective. People need to recognize the complexity of situations and acknowledge external factors. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" they can ask, "What were all the factors involved?" They can practice self-compassion, reminding themselves that everyone makes mistakes and faces challenges. Accepting that they are not responsible for everything that goes wrong allows them to see situations more clearly. Seeking feedback from others helps challenge self-blame. Talking to a trusted friend, mentor, or therapist can provide a more balanced perspective. Often, others can see the situation more objectively and point out factors that the person might have overlooked. Hearing an outside view can make it easier to understand that not everything is a personal failure. Mindfulness and self-reflection can also help. Paying attention to thought patterns and recognizing when self-blame arises allows for change. Instead of immediately assuming fault, people can pause and consider alternative explanations. Writing down thoughts and examining them logically can reveal distorted thinking. Over time, this practice helps reduce automatic self-blame. Focusing on learning rather than fault-finding creates a healthier mindset. Instead of blaming themselves for a mistake, people can ask, "What can I learn from this?" This shift reduces guilt and encourages growth. It helps them move forward instead of getting stuck in regret. Letting go of self-blame does not mean avoiding responsibility. It means recognizing when responsibility is shared or misplaced. It means acknowledging mistakes without seeing them as a personal flaw. It means understanding that life is complex and that not everything is within personal control. This change allows for a healthier, more balanced way of thinking and living. Blaming others happens when someone refuses to take responsibility for their actions or circumstances. They shift fault onto someone else, often to protect their self-image, avoid consequences, or escape discomfort. This habit can damage relationships, create workplace tension, and stall personal growth. Imagine a project at work falls behind schedule. A team member might say, "It's not my fault. If the marketing team had provided the data sooner, we'd be on track." Instead of recognizing that they could have followed up or adjusted their timeline, they place the responsibility elsewhere. This behavior isn't limited to the workplace. In relationships, someone might say, "You always make me angry," as if their emotions are entirely caused by another person's actions. In reality, feelings come from internal responses, but blaming others makes it seem like control lies outside of oneself. Shifting blame can start early in life. A child might break a lamp and say, "My sister distracted me," instead of admitting to playing too roughly. If this pattern continues into adulthood, it can shape how a person navigates conflicts, setbacks, acts, and failures. Over time, they may struggle to hold themselves accountable, believing external forces dictate their outcomes. One reason people blame others is self-protection. Admitting fault can feel uncomfortable, especially when mistakes lead to embarrassment, guilt, or punishment. Blaming someone else offers a way out of those feelings. For example, if a student fails a test, they might claim the teacher didn't explain the material well enough. This lets them avoid considering that they may not have studied effectively. By shifting responsibility, they keep their self-esteem intact, but they also lose the chance to learn and improve. Another reason people blame others is the need to maintain control. Paradoxically, blaming can make someone feel more powerful. If problems are always someone else's fault, they don't have to change their own behavior. If a manager constantly criticizes employees instead of recognizing gaps in their leadership, they can continue running things the same way. This false sense of control, however, is fragile. Over time, those around them may grow frustrated, and the real issues remain unresolved. Blame also serves as a defense mechanism against feelings of helplessness. When faced with a difficult situation, blaming another person can provide a temporary sense of relief. If a driver gets a ticket, they might argue that the police officer was unfair instead of considering whether they were speeding. This response shields them from discomfort, but does nothing to change the reality of the situation. In some cases, blaming others stems from deep-seated beliefs. People who view the world as fundamentally unfair may feel like victims of circumstance. They might believe that outside forces constantly work against them. If they don't get a promotion, they assume favoritism was involved instead of considering their performance. If their business fails, they may blame market conditions instead of analyzing their own decisions. These patterns reinforce a cycle where they see themselves as powerless rather than as active participants in their lives. Blaming others can also become a habit in relationships. One partner might accuse the other of causing all their problems, saying things like, "If you were more supportive, I wouldn't be so stressed." While external factors can influence emotions, placing full responsibility on someone else removes personal agency. A person who always blames their partner for arguments might struggle to see how their own words or actions contribute to conflict. This can erode trust and make it difficult to resolve issues in a healthy way. In workplace settings, blame can create a toxic culture. Employees who fear being blamed may become defensive or avoid taking risks. A manager who frequently assigns fault without examining systems or processes may contribute to low morale. When something goes wrong, a culture of blame focuses on finding a scapegoat instead of identifying solutions. Over time, this can reduce innovation, encourage secrecy, and make employees hesitant to take initiative. Blame can also spread beyond individuals to entire groups. People might blame a department, a community, or even an entire demographic for problems they experience. This broad form of blame can lead to division, resentment, and a lack of productive discussion. If a business struggles, leaders might blame lazy employees instead of looking at operational inefficiencies. If a neighborhood experiences crime, some might blame an entire population rather than examining economic and social factors. This oversimplified way of thinking can prevent meaningful solutions and foster unfair biases. There are ways to break the cycle of blaming others. The first step is recognizing when blame occurs. This requires honest self-reflection and the willingness to examine personal patterns. When frustration arises, asking, "What role did I play in this?" can shift the focus from external factors to internal ones. For example, if a person consistently argues with coworkers, they might consider how their communication style contributes to misunderstandings. Another useful approach is shifting from blame to problem solving. Instead of focusing on whose fault something is, the focus can be on how to fix it. If a project falls behind schedule, rather than blaming a teammate, someone could ask, "What can we do to get back on track?" This small shift in perspective encourages collaboration and forward thinking. It also helps create a more positive environment where people feel safe admitting mistakes and learning from them. Accountability plays a key role in overcoming blame. Taking responsibility for one's actions does not mean taking all the blame or ignoring external factors. It means acknowledging where personal choices and behaviors contribute to outcomes. If a meeting goes poorly, someone might recognize they were unprepared instead of blaming distractions. This level of ownership can lead to meaningful change, whether in personal growth, relationships, or professional settings. Developing emotional awareness can also reduce blame. People who blame others often react impulsively to frustration or disappointment. Learning to pause and reflect before assigning fault can lead to better decision-making. If a person is late to an event, instead of blaming traffic, they might acknowledge they could have left earlier. This shift fosters a mindset of control over one's own actions rather than feeling at the mercy of external forces. Breaking free from blame can also improve relationships. Instead of accusing a partner of causing unhappiness, someone might express how they feel and what they need. Saying, "I feel overwhelmed when household tasks pile up," invites a conversation, while saying, "You never help out," places blame. This small change in language can create healthier dynamics and open up space for understanding. In professional settings, shifting from blame to accountability can create a stronger team culture. Leaders who acknowledge their own mistakes set an example for employees. If a project doesn't meet expectations, a leader who says, "I should have provided clearer guidance," fosters a culture where mistakes are opportunities for learning rather than fear-inducing events. This can lead to more engaged employees, increased trust, and better problem solving. People who stop blaming others often feel more in control of their own lives. When someone acknowledges their role in a situation, they gain the ability to change it. If a business owner recognizes their pricing strategy is flawed, rather than blaming competitors, they can make adjustments. If a student acknowledges they need better study habits rather than blaming the professor, they can improve their performance. This mindset shift leads to growth and resilience, making challenges feel more manageable. Blaming others is easy, but it often comes at a cost. It can damage relationships, limit personal development, and create negative environments. Breaking the habit requires self-awareness, accountability, and a willingness to shift from blame to problem solving. By focusing on what can be changed rather than who is at fault, individuals can build stronger relationships, improve work environments, and take greater control of their own lives. Perfectionism is the belief that anything less than flawless is unacceptable. It pushes people to set impossibly high standards for themselves and others. When they fail to meet those standards, they feel inadequate, frustrated, or guilty. They may procrastinate, overwork, or avoid tasks altogether because they fear making mistakes. Perfectionism often leads to stress, anxiety, and burnout. It can make even small tasks feel overwhelming. A person with perfectionist tendencies may rewrite an email several times before sending it. They worry about how every word sounds, whether the punctuation is correct or if the recipient will misinterpret their tone. If they make a minor error, they dwell on it for hours. They may believe one small mistake ruins everything. This type of thinking makes everyday tasks feel exhausting. Instead of completing a task efficiently, they spend unnecessary time and energy making sure everything is just right. In school, a student with perfectionist tendencies may avoid starting a paper because they fear it won't be good enough. They wait until they feel confident enough to write the perfect first sentence. When they do start, they revise endlessly, trying to make every paragraph flawless. As the deadline approaches, they panic. They may turn in an unfinished paper or stay up all night trying to fix every detail. Even if they receive a high grade, they only focus on the mistakes. At work, perfectionism can lead to inefficiency. A person may take longer than necessary to complete a project because they keep refining small details. They hesitate to delegate tasks because they fear others won't meet their high standards. This leads to exhaustion and resentment. They feel like they are doing everything themselves, yet they struggle to let go of control. Their coworkers may find them difficult to work with because they insist on perfection in every aspect. Perfectionism also affects relationships. A person who expects perfection from their partner may become overly critical. They focus on flaws instead of appreciating strengths. If their partner forgets an important date or makes a small mistake, they see it as a bigger problem than it is. This creates tension and makes it hard to maintain healthy relationships. People who set unrealistic standards for themselves may also struggle to accept love and praise. If someone compliments them, they dismiss it, thinking they don't deserve it. They assume the person is just being polite rather than sincere. Perfectionism is often rooted in childhood experiences. A child who received praise only for achievements may grow up believing that their worth depends on success. If their parents expected straight A's, flawless performances, or constant obedience, they may feel that making mistakes is unacceptable. This belief follows them into adulthood. They judge themselves harshly, always feeling like they need to do more. The fear of failure is a driving force behind perfectionism. A person may avoid trying new things because they don't want to risk making mistakes. They stick to what they know instead of stepping out of their comfort zone. This limits personal and professional growth. They may turn down opportunities because they believe they are not ready or not good enough. Instead of seeing mistakes as learning experiences, they see them as proof of incompetence. Perfectionism can take different forms. Some people hold themselves to impossibly high standards, while others expect perfection from those around them. A manager may set unrealistic expectations for their team, becoming frustrated when employees don't meet them. They may struggle to accept that mistakes are a natural part of learning. This creates a stressful work environment where people feel afraid to take risks or share ideas. Another form of perfectionism is socially prescribed perfectionism. This happens when a person believes others expect them to be perfect. They feel pressure to maintain a flawless image, even if it is unrealistic. They may avoid asking for help because they fear looking weak. They struggle with self-doubt, believing they are not good enough despite external success. They may overwork themselves to prove their worth, leading to burnout. Some perfectionists mask their fear of failure by procrastinating. They put off tasks because they want to wait until they can do them perfectly. Instead of starting a project, they spend hours planning or researching, trying to ensure they get everything right from the beginning. When they finally start, they feel rushed, increasing their anxiety. They may end up turning in incomplete work because they ran out of time. Others avoid tasks altogether, telling themselves they will do them later. This cycle of procrastination and panic reinforces their fear of imperfection. Perfectionism also affects mental health. Constantly striving for impossible standards leads to stress, anxiety, and depression. A person may feel like they are never good enough, no matter how much they achieve. They struggle to enjoy their accomplishments because they always focus on what they could have done better. This mindset makes it hard to feel satisfied or content. Over time, it can lead to exhaustion and emotional breakdowns. Physical health also suffers from perfectionism. The pressure to always perform at a high level can lead to chronic stress. This stress affects the body, causing headaches, muscle tension, and digestive issues. Sleep problems are common because perfectionists often stay up late working on tasks or worrying about mistakes. Their bodies remain in a state of tension, making it hard to relax. Perfectionists often have a harsh inner critic. This voice tells them they are not good enough, that they should have done better, or that they are a failure. They replay mistakes in their minds, analyzing every detail. Instead of forgiving themselves, they punish themselves for not meeting their high standards. They may feel guilty for relaxing or taking breaks, believing they should always be productive. This constant self-criticism takes a toll on their confidence and self-esteem. Overcoming perfectionism requires changing thought patterns. Recognizing that mistakes are a natural part of life is essential. Instead of seeing failure as something to fear, it helps to see it as a learning opportunity. A person can challenge their perfectionist thinking by questioning their beliefs. If they think, this has to be perfect, they can ask themselves, what would happen if it's not? Often, the answer is less serious than they expect. Setting realistic goals is another way to manage perfectionism. Instead of aiming for flawless work, a person can focus on doing their best. They can remind themselves that no one is perfect and making mistakes does not define their worth. Accepting that good enough is sometimes enough helps reduce stress. Allowing themselves to make small mistakes without punishment builds confidence and resilience. Perfectionists benefit from breaking tasks into smaller steps. Instead of aiming for a perfect final product, they can focus on progress. If writing a report feels overwhelming, they can start with an outline instead of trying to write the entire document perfectly in one sitting. Taking small steps makes tasks feel more manageable and reduces the pressure to get everything right on the first try. Practicing self-compassion helps perfectionists be kinder to themselves. They can remind themselves that everyone makes mistakes and that failure does not mean they are unworthy. Speaking to themselves with the same kindness they would offer a friend can help shift their mindset. Instead of saying, I failed, they can say, I learned something from this experience. Letting go of control is another challenge for perfectionists. Accepting that not everything can be planned or controlled helps reduce anxiety. Trusting others to contribute, even if their work is not perfect, builds teamwork and reduces stress. Realizing that done is better than perfect allows them to complete tasks without obsessing over every detail. Perfectionism is not the same as striving for excellence. Wanting to do well is natural, but expecting perfection is unrealistic. Learning to accept imperfections allows people to grow, take risks, and enjoy life. The pursuit of perfection often creates more harm than good. Recognizing the difference between healthy ambition and unhealthy perfectionism makes it easier to break free from the pressure of unrealistic standards. People often set strict rules for themselves and others without realizing how these rules affect their thoughts and emotions. Should statements are one example. These are mental rules that dictate how life must be, creating unnecessary pressure and unrealistic expectations. When someone repeatedly tells themselves how they should act, feel, or think, they create an internal standard that might not align with reality. This way of thinking makes it difficult to accept life as it is, leading to frustration, guilt, and disappointment. A person who uses should statements may often think, I should always be productive, or I should never make mistakes. These statements make it seem like anything less than perfection is unacceptable. When reality does not match these internal expectations, self-criticism takes over. Instead of recognizing that people have limits and that mistakes are part of learning, the mind sees them as failures. This creates stress, anxiety, and self-doubt. People apply should statements to different areas of life, including work, relationships, and personal development. A worker might think, I should always meet my deadlines, even when unforeseen obstacles arise. A person in a relationship may believe, my partner should always understand my needs, even though communication requires effort from both sides. Someone working on self-improvement might think, I should always feel happy and motivated, but emotions naturally fluctuate. These rigid expectations lead to disappointment because they assume life follows a fixed script. Should statements often come from upbringing, culture, or personal beliefs. Parents and teachers may tell children, "You should always try your best," which can be positive, but may also create pressure. Cultural expectations can reinforce these beliefs, leading someone to think, "I should be married by now," or "I should have a successful career." While goals and aspirations are valuable, rigidly attaching self-worth to these expectations can be harmful. One of the biggest problems with should statements is that they make people feel guilty. If someone believes, "I should be more social," but they enjoy solitude, they might feel like they are failing, even though their behavior aligns with their natural preferences. Instead of recognizing their personality traits, they judge themselves. Guilt makes it harder to change because it creates shame rather than motivation. Should statements can also create resentment. If a person thinks, "My friends should always support me," and a friend fails to meet this expectation, they might feel betrayed. Instead of understanding that people have different capacities for support, they see it as a personal failure. This can strain relationships and lead to unnecessary conflict. Many people do not realize that should statements influence their thoughts daily. They operate in the background, shaping how they view themselves and the world. Someone might wake up thinking, "I should go to the gym today," but instead of feeling motivated, they feel pressured. This pressure often leads to procrastination. The brain resists forced obligations, making it harder to take action. Instead of exercising because they enjoy it, they do it out of guilt, which reduces long-term motivation. Should statements also limit flexibility? If someone believes, "I should always know the answer," they struggle when faced with uncertainty. Instead of admitting they need help, they pretend to have everything figured out. This prevents learning and personal growth. If someone thinks, "I should never fail," they avoid taking risks. Growth comes from making mistakes and adapting, but rigid beliefs prevent people from exploring new opportunities. Reframing should statements helps reduce their negative impact. Instead of saying, "I should exercise more," a person can say, "I want to take care of my body." Instead of, "I should be successful by now," they can say, "I am working towards my goals at my own pace." These small shifts in language reduce guilt and increase motivation. They transform obligations into choices, making it easier to take action. Awareness is the first step in breaking free from should statements. People must recognize when they are using them and question whether these beliefs are realistic. If someone thinks, "I should always be happy," they can ask, "Is it possible to always be happy?" Emotions naturally fluctuate, so expecting constant happiness sets up disappointment. By challenging these thoughts, people can develop a healthier mindset. Self-compassion also plays a crucial role in overcoming should statements. Instead of harshly judging themselves for not meeting unrealistic standards, people can acknowledge their efforts. If a person thinks, "I should be a better friend," they can shift to, "I am doing my best to be a good friend." This small change reduces self-judgment and encourages personal growth without pressure. Should statements also affect how people view others? If someone believes people should always be kind, they may become frustrated when encountering rudeness. While kindness is a valuable trait, expecting it from everyone leads to disappointment. Accepting that people have flaws and different experiences makes it easier to navigate relationships. Instead of reacting with anger, people can respond with understanding. Another approach to reducing should statements is focusing on preferences instead of rigid rules. Instead of, "I should eat healthy all the time," a person can say, "I prefer to eat nutritious foods when possible." This shift allows flexibility. If they eat something unhealthy, they do not see it as a failure, but as part of a balanced approach. Flexibility prevents unnecessary guilt and promotes a healthier mindset. People often hold on to should statements because they believe these rules will keep them accountable. However, motivation based on guilt is not sustainable. Positive motivation comes from valuing growth rather than fearing failure. Instead of, "I should work harder," a person can think, "I want to improve my skills." This perspective creates motivation without pressure. Language plays a powerful role in shaping thoughts. Small adjustments in wording change how people feel about their actions. Instead of, I should be more confident, saying, I am working on my confidence, acknowledges progress. This approach allows people to appreciate their journey rather than focusing on what they lack. Should statements also create a sense of urgency that may not be necessary? If a person thinks, I should have my life figured out by now, they may feel like they are behind. But life does not follow a set timeline. Removing these artificial deadlines allows people to grow at their own pace. Comparing progress to others only creates stress. Everyone moves through life differently, and embracing this reality leads to greater peace of mind. Overcoming should statements does not mean giving up on goals. It means approaching goals with a healthier mindset. Instead of forcing themselves to meet unrealistic expectations, people can focus on gradual improvement, shifting from I should always be successful to I am learning from every experience allows for growth without self-judgment. Recognizing that setbacks are part of life removes unnecessary pressure. By becoming aware of should statements, challenging their accuracy, and reframing them in a positive way, people can develop a more balanced outlook. Removing the pressure of rigid expectations allows for greater flexibility, self-compassion, and motivation. Making these small shifts in thinking helps create a healthier mindset and a more fulfilling life. People often compare themselves to others. It happens naturally. You see someone with a better job, a nicer car, or a more exciting life, and you start thinking about where you stand. This kind of thinking can be useful in some cases, but it often becomes a trap. Instead of motivating you, it makes you feel inadequate. You measure yourself against someone else's success without considering the full picture. The comparisons are often unfair because they leave out details that matter. Imagine scrolling through social media. A friend posts pictures from an expensive vacation. Another friend celebrates a promotion. Someone else shares photos from a wedding. If you are sitting at home feeling stuck in your routine, you might start wondering why your life doesn't look the same. You don't think about the fact that people share only their best moments. You don't see the hard work, struggles, or setbacks behind the scenes. You compare your everyday life to someone else's highlight reel, and it doesn't feel good. This happens in careers too. You see someone land a great job or start a successful business. If you feel stuck in your own career, you might think you are falling behind. You assume they have something special that you don't. You don't think about the years of effort, failures, and sacrifices that led to their success. You don't see the support they had or the luck that played a role. You only see the end result and compare it to where you are now. That kind of thinking makes you feel like you are failing when, in reality, you are just on a different path. People also compare their personal lives. Someone has a perfect relationship, and you wonder why yours isn't the same. Someone seems to have more friends, a busier social life, or a more exciting lifestyle. You start thinking there must be something wrong with you. But relationships and friendships are complicated. What you see from the outside doesn't show the full reality. A couple that looks happy online might be struggling behind closed doors. A person with a busy social life might feel lonely in ways you don't see. Comparing your life to theirs ignores the complexities that exist in everyone's situation. This trap often starts in childhood. Kids compare themselves in school. Someone gets better grades, runs faster, or has more friends. That pattern continues into adulthood. Society reinforces it by celebrating success in visible ways. Wealth, status, and achievements get attention. Struggles, setbacks, and failures stay hidden. People learn to measure themselves by external markers rather than by personal growth. The problem with these comparisons is that they create unnecessary pressure. If you constantly feel like you are behind, you may push yourself in ways that aren't healthy. You might take on too much, chasing an idea of success that doesn't fit your values. You might feel discouraged and stop trying altogether because you think you can never catch up. Instead of improving your life, the comparisons hold you back. Social media makes this worse. In the past, people compared themselves mostly to friends, family, or coworkers. Now, you can compare yourself to thousands of people at once. You can see the best parts of their lives in real time. That kind of exposure makes it easy to feel like you are always behind. You start believing that everyone else has a better life, even though you only see part of the story. A common form of unrealistic comparison is with celebrities or influencers. These people have resources and lifestyles that most people don't. They have teams managing their image. They have money, connections, and opportunities that make their lives look polished. But when you compare yourself to them, you ignore those factors. You start expecting yourself to look as good, achieve as much, or be as happy as someone whose entire job is to maintain an image. That kind of thinking is unfair to yourself. Even in everyday life, unrealistic comparisons show up. You might compare your home to someone else's and feel like it's not good enough. You might compare your body to someone else's and feel dissatisfied. You might compare your intelligence, creativity, or skills to others and feel like you don't measure up. In each case, you overlook the differences in circumstances, effort, and priorities. One of the most harmful effects of unrealistic comparisons is that they take away from your own progress. Instead of focusing on how far you have come, you focus on how far you think you have to go. Instead of recognizing your own strengths, you fixate on what you lack. That mindset makes it hard to appreciate your own journey. It creates a constant feeling of not being enough. Another problem is that comparisons often don't consider personal differences. People have different strengths, backgrounds, and goals. What works for one person might not work for another. Just because someone else is ahead in one area doesn't mean they are ahead in life. Success looks different for everyone. Comparing yourself to someone with different circumstances doesn't make sense. A healthier way to think about comparisons is to use them for inspiration instead of self-judgment. If someone has something you admire, you can learn from them. You can study their habits, ask for advice, or see what steps they took. But their success doesn't take away from yours. Their achievements don't mean you are failing. You are on your own timeline. It also helps to compare yourself to your past self rather than to others. If you are growing, learning, and improving in some way, you are making progress. That matters more than keeping up with someone else. Small improvements add up over time. If you keep moving forward, you will get where you want to go. Unrealistic comparisons are a common trap, but they don't have to control how you see yourself. Recognizing the pattern is the first step. When you catch yourself making unfair comparisons, take a step back. Ask yourself if you have all the information. Think about whether the comparison is helping you or hurting you. Focus on your own path. The more you do that, the easier it becomes to appreciate where you are and where you are going. People tend to seek information that supports what they already believe. They ignore or dismiss anything that contradicts their views. This is called confirmation bias. It shapes how people interpret facts, news, and even conversations. It happens in politics, science, personal relationships, and everyday decisions. It influences what people read, who they listen to, and how they form opinions. A person who believes a particular diet is the best will focus on articles and research that support that view. They will dismiss studies that suggest another diet might be better. If they try a diet and lose weight, they see it as proof that their belief is correct. If they gain weight, they may blame other factors instead of questioning their initial belief. The bias makes them focus only on what aligns with their thinking and disregard anything else. It appears in politics constantly. Someone who supports a particular candidate will watch news channels that praise them. They will avoid those that criticize them. They will surround themselves with people who share their views. Even when presented with clear evidence of wrongdoing, they will find ways to explain it away or claim bias against their candidate. The same applies to those who oppose a politician. They will assume the worst about the candidate and reject any positive information. This deepens divisions and makes meaningful discussions harder. Social media strengthens confirmation bias. Algorithms show people what they like to see. If someone believes a conspiracy theory, they will be shown more posts and videos that support it. They will not see content that questions or disproves the theory. Over time, this creates a false sense of certainty. They may believe their view is the only logical one because everything they see confirms it. This makes them resistant to changing their mind, even when faced with solid evidence. In science, confirmation bias can affect research. A scientist who expects a certain outcome may interpret data in a way that supports their hypothesis. They may unconsciously overlook data that contradicts it. This can lead to flawed conclusions. Peer review and replication help reduce this. But the bias is strong. It takes effort to remain objective and consider all evidence equally. Even experienced researchers struggle with it. It also influences everyday decisions. A person who believes a certain brand is the best will look for positive reviews and ignore negative ones. They will remember good experiences with the brand and forget the bad ones. If a friend tells them another brand is better, they may dismiss the suggestion without real consideration. This happens in hiring decisions too. A manager who believes a candidate is the best choice may focus on their strengths and ignore red flags. They may also downplay the strengths of other candidates. This can lead to hiring mistakes. Relationships are not immune to confirmation bias. If someone believes their partner is untrustworthy, they will notice every small action that seems suspicious. They will overlook positive gestures. This creates a cycle where they become more convinced over time. If they believe their partner is kind and loyal, they will ignore warning signs and make excuses for bad behavior. This can keep them in unhealthy relationships longer than they should be. Medical decisions are also affected. A person who distrusts doctors may ignore expert advice and look for alternative treatments. They will focus on stories that confirm their distrust and ignore cases where medical treatment saved lives. Someone who believes strongly in a particular supplement will see every improvement in their health as proof that it works, even if other factors are responsible. This can lead to dangerous choices and unnecessary suffering. People often overestimate how rational they are. They assume they base their beliefs on facts, but confirmation bias skews their perception. They might believe they are open-minded, yet they reject opposing views before considering them. This is why debates rarely change minds. When someone hears an argument that contradicts their belief, their instinct is to find reasons to dismiss it rather than evaluate it objectively. This is why facts alone are not enough to change opinions. Emotions and existing beliefs play a strong role. Marketing takes advantage of confirmation bias. Companies highlight customer testimonials that align with their brand message. They downplay complaints or frame them as rare exceptions. If a person already believes a product is good, they will see these testimonials as further proof. If they believe the product is bad, they will focus on the negative reviews. This makes brand loyalty strong. People rarely reconsider their opinions once they are set. Confirmation bias is not always bad. It helps people feel confident in their choices. It makes life easier by filtering out conflicting information. If people questioned everything all the time, decision-making would become overwhelming. However, it becomes a problem when it leads to poor choices, reinforces false beliefs, or prevents growth. Breaking free from confirmation bias takes effort. It requires actively seeking out opposing viewpoints. It means considering information that challenges existing beliefs instead of dismissing it. This does not mean accepting every argument, but weighing evidence fairly. It helps to ask, what would it take for me to change my mind? If the answer is nothing, then the belief is not based on logic, but on bias. Recognizing this is the first step toward clearer thinking. It also helps to slow down before reacting. When faced with new information, the first instinct is often to reject it if it conflicts with existing beliefs. Instead of responding immediately, taking time to evaluate the information can lead to better judgment. Checking sources, looking at multiple perspectives, and questioning assumptions are all useful strategies. Confirmation bias is deeply ingrained. It affects everyone. No one is completely free from it. The best anyone can do is be aware of it and make an effort to counteract it. By doing so, people can make better decisions, have more meaningful discussions, and be more open to learning new things. The world is complex, and no single viewpoint has all the answers. Recognizing bias is the first step toward understanding reality more clearly. People often interpret others' actions based on their own thoughts, experiences, and expectations. Hostile attribution bias occurs when someone assumes that another person's behavior is intentionally meant to be harmful or hostile, even when there is no clear evidence. This pattern of thinking influences how people react to social situations, often leading to misunderstandings, conflict, and strained relationships. Imagine someone is walking down a hallway at work and passes a colleague who doesn't acknowledge them. A person with a neutral perspective might think their colleague was distracted or preoccupied. Someone with hostile attribution bias, however, might assume the colleague intentionally ignored them out of dislike or disrespect. This assumption creates unnecessary tension and may lead the person to respond with resentment or even aggression, further escalating a situation that never existed in the first place. This kind of thinking develops early in life. Children who experience frequent hostility, unpredictability, or rejection from caregivers may grow up expecting the same treatment from others. If a child gets frequently blamed or punished unfairly, they may begin to see neutral actions from peers or teachers as deliberate attacks. For example, if a classmate accidentally bumps into them, they may assume it was on purpose. This mindset follows many people into adulthood, shaping their social interactions and often leading to patterns of defensive or aggressive behavior. Hostile attribution bias doesn't just affect personal relationships. It appears in professional settings, schools, and even casual social encounters. A manager who consistently believes employees are trying to undermine them may become overly critical, creating a toxic work environment. A student who assumes a teacher dislikes them may disengage from learning, feeling targeted when they are actually being treated fairly. In friendships, a person with this bias may constantly feel slighted, leading them to push people away before they can experience perceived rejection. In romantic relationships, this pattern of thinking can create unnecessary conflict. If one partner is running late, the other might interpret it as intentional disrespect instead of considering possible reasons like traffic or a last-minute work obligation. This assumption leads to frustration, accusations, and arguments that could have been avoided. Over time, these negative interpretations wear down trust and emotional connection, making relationships feel unsafe and exhausting. Social media has amplified hostile attribution bias. Online communication lacks tone, body language, and facial expressions, making it easier to misinterpret messages. A short reply or a delayed response might be seen as deliberate rudeness or rejection. Someone who is already prone to assuming hostility may take a simple interaction out of context and escalate a minor issue into a major conflict. The anonymity of the internet also encourages people to assume the worst about strangers, leading to unnecessary arguments and hostility in comment sections and discussions. Violence and aggression are often linked to hostile attribution bias. Studies on aggression in children and adults have found that those who frequently interpret neutral actions as hostile are more likely to react with anger or even physical aggression. This pattern is common in people with histories of trauma, neglect, or environments where they had to be constantly on guard. If someone grows up in a setting where they are frequently attacked or betrayed, they may carry that expectation into every interaction. In law enforcement and criminal justice, hostile attribution bias can have serious consequences. A police officer who assumes hostility in every situation may react with unnecessary force. A judge who perceives defendants as intentionally defiant may hand down harsher sentences. A person with a criminal history who believes society is out to get them may refuse to cooperate with authorities, further reinforcing negative outcomes. These assumptions shape real-world decisions that impact lives, often in ways that are difficult to reverse. Parenting styles can either reinforce or challenge hostile attribution bias. Parents who frequently criticize or punish their children without explanation may teach them to expect hostility from others. On the other hand, parents who help children interpret situations more accurately can reduce this bias. If a child assumes their sibling took a toy just to make them mad, a parent can guide them to consider other possibilities. Maybe their sibling just wanted to play with it. This simple shift in perspective can prevent lifelong patterns of defensive and aggressive behavior. Cultural and societal influences also play a role. In highly competitive or distrustful environments, people may develop a stronger tendency to assume hostility. If a workplace fosters a cutthroat atmosphere, employees may believe their colleagues are constantly trying to undermine them. If a community has high levels of crime or political division, people may expect hostility from others as a form of self-protection. These expectations shape interactions, creating cycles of distrust and conflict that are difficult to break. Breaking free from hostile attribution bias requires self-awareness and effort. Recognizing the tendency to assume the worst in others is the first step. When faced with a situation that triggers feelings of hostility or resentment, asking a simple question can help reframe the thought process. Is there another possible explanation for this? Learning to pause before reacting allows room for more accurate interpretations. This shift can make personal and professional relationships healthier and more enjoyable. Therapy and cognitive behavioral strategies can help those who struggle with this bias. Therapists often use exercises that encourage individuals to challenge their assumptions and consider alternative viewpoints. Role-playing and perspective-taking exercises help people see how different interpretations can lead to different emotional reactions. By practicing these skills, people can reduce their tendency to assume hostility and build stronger, more trusting relationships. Conflict resolution skills also play a crucial role. Learning to communicate openly and ask clarifying questions can prevent misunderstandings. Instead of assuming a friend is ignoring messages out of spite, asking them directly can lead to a clearer understanding. Instead of believing a coworker is sabotaging a project, discussing concerns in a calm, direct manner can reveal the true intent. These habits prevent unnecessary conflicts and create a more cooperative environment. Schools and workplaces can take proactive steps to reduce hostile attribution bias. Teaching social-emotional skills in education helps children learn to interpret social cues accurately. In professional environments, fostering open communication and psychological safety helps employees feel secure, reducing the tendency to assume hostility. Leadership that models fair and transparent communication can shift workplace culture toward trust and cooperation instead of fear and suspicion. People who reduce their hostile attribution bias experience significant benefits. They feel less stressed because they are not constantly expecting conflict. Their relationships improve because they react with understanding rather than defensiveness. They make better decisions because they base their actions on reality rather than assumptions. Over time, these changes lead to a more fulfilling and less combative way of interacting with the world. Shifting away from hostile attribution bias does not mean ignoring real hostility when it exists. Some situations do involve genuine aggression or bad intent. The goal is not to assume the best in all cases, but rather to assess each situation accurately. Differentiating between real threats and perceived ones leads to better judgment and healthier relationships. Learning to interpret social interactions more accurately is a skill that benefits every aspect of life, from friendships and family dynamics to workplace interactions and societal engagement. When people challenge their tendency to assume hostility, they open the door to more meaningful connections and a more positive experience of the world around them. People often make quick judgments about others without considering the full context of a situation. The fundamental attribution error happens when someone assumes that another person's behavior is due to their character rather than external circumstances. This mistake is common in everyday life and can shape the way people think about each other in ways that are often inaccurate or unfair. Imagine a person driving aggressively, weaving in and out of traffic. The immediate assumption might be that this person is reckless or inconsiderate. The thought rarely crosses the mind that they might be rushing to the hospital because a loved one is in critical condition. This tendency to explain behavior based on personality while ignoring situational factors is the fundamental attribution error in action. People do this because it is easier and more instinctive to judge actions than to think about hidden reasons that might explain them. This error appears in the workplace all the time. A manager might see an employee arriving late and assume they are lazy or careless. They don't consider that the person might have been dealing with an emergency at home or got caught in an unexpected traffic jam. The judgment focuses on what is visible, not on the broader situation. Over time, if these assumptions build up, they can create misunderstandings and unfair treatment, making workplaces feel hostile or unwelcoming. It happens in schools too. A student who fails a test might be seen as unmotivated or unintelligent. The teacher may not consider that the student had trouble sleeping the night before or had limited time to study because of family responsibilities. The focus is on the student's supposed personal failure rather than on external factors that may have played a role. This can lead to negative labeling, which makes it harder for the student to improve because they start believing that they are just bad at the subject rather than recognizing that circumstances played a part. The fundamental attribution error can also affect personal relationships. If a friend cancels plans at the last minute, the immediate reaction might be frustration or disappointment. The assumption could be that the friend doesn't value the relationship or is unreliable. In reality, they might be struggling with personal issues that they don't feel comfortable discussing. When people consistently assume negative intent, relationships suffer. Trust erodes, and minor misunderstandings grow into larger conflicts. Recognizing that behavior is not always a reflection of character can prevent unnecessary disputes and strengthen relationships. Cultural differences play a role in how this error manifests. In individualistic cultures, like those in the United States or many Western European countries, people tend to emphasize personal responsibility. They often believe that individuals control their own fate and should be held accountable for their actions. This mindset makes it more likely that people will attribute others' behaviors to personality rather than to circumstances. In contrast, collectivist cultures, such as those found in many Asian countries, focus more on external factors and community influences. People in these cultures are less likely to make quick personal judgments and more likely to consider situational explanations. News and social media amplify the fundamental attribution error. When a public figure makes a mistake, immediate judgments follow. People assume their actions reflect their true character rather than considering context or external pressures. A celebrity who snaps at a fan might be labeled as rude without anyone thinking about whether they were exhausted, overwhelmed, or dealing with personal stress. A politician who stumbles over words might be seen as incompetent, even though they could just be having a bad day. The fast pace of information sharing leads to instant reactions, often based on incomplete details, reinforcing this error on a large scale. Crime reporting provides another example. When someone commits a crime, the narrative often focuses on their morality or personal failings. Rarely does the discussion center on the social and economic conditions that might have contributed to their actions. A person stealing food is more likely to be called a criminal than someone struggling with poverty. The assumption is that they are bad, rather than that they might be desperate. This kind of thinking shapes public opinion and policy in ways that can be harmful and prevent deeper understanding of societal issues. In hiring decisions, the fundamental attribution error can lead to bias. An interviewer might judge a nervous candidate as unqualified, assuming their anxiety means they lack confidence or competence. The reality might be that the candidate is well prepared but simply experiences interview anxiety. The focus on personality rather than context can cause employers to overlook talented individuals who just need the right environment to succeed. This error extends to politics and group identity. When someone from an opposing political party makes a mistake, it is easy to assume it reflects their true nature. If a rival politician misspeaks, supporters of the other side may call them unintelligent or dishonest. Yet when someone from their own party does the same thing, they might explain it as a slip of the tongue or a result of stress. The difference in interpretation shows how people apply situational explanations to those they support while making personal judgments about those they oppose. The legal system is not immune. Juries and judges may make decisions influenced by this error. A defendant who appears unremorseful might be seen as inherently dangerous, while their actual emotions might be shaped by nervousness or cultural differences in expression. The assumption that body language or facial expressions reveal truth is another way people misattribute behavior to personality rather than situation. Parenting provides another clear example. A child throwing a tantrum in a store might cause strangers to assume they are spoiled or that the parents lack discipline. They don't consider that the child might be tired, hungry, or overwhelmed. Parents themselves fall into this trap, believing their child's bad behavior reflects a deep character flaw rather than a temporary struggle. This mindset can affect discipline approaches, sometimes leading to harsher punishments instead of solutions that address the root cause of the behavior. Overcoming the fundamental attribution error requires conscious effort. It means pausing before making assumptions and considering alternative explanations for behavior. People can train themselves to ask questions instead of jumping to conclusions. If someone is rude, it helps to wonder whether they might be having a difficult day, rather than assuming they are simply a mean person. Practicing empathy makes interactions smoother and reduces unnecessary conflict. Reflecting on personal experiences helps as well. Everyone has had moments where they acted out of character because of stress, fatigue, or pressure. Recognizing that others go through similar situations makes it easier to avoid harsh judgments. Instead of labeling someone based on a single action, looking at patterns over time gives a more accurate picture of who they are. Training in workplaces and schools can also reduce the impact of this error. Encouraging people to consider both personal and external factors when evaluating behavior can lead to fairer treatment and better decision-making. Leaders who understand this bias can create environments where assumptions are questioned rather than accepted at face value. Awareness of the fundamental attribution error improves relationships, workplace interactions, and even large-scale social systems. Recognizing that behavior is shaped by both personality and environment leads to more understanding and less unnecessary conflict. The challenge lies in overcoming the instinct to judge quickly and instead take a broader view of human actions. People like to feel in control. It provides a sense of security. When things go well, they want to believe their actions made it happen. When things go wrong, they look for something or someone to blame. The illusion of control is the false belief that people have power over events when they actually do not. This thinking trap causes frustration, stress, and poor decision-making. It affects everyday life in ways that people often do not recognize. A common example is gambling. Many gamblers believe they can influence the outcome of a game of chance. A person rolling dice in a casino may throw them gently if they need a low number or with force if they want a high one. In reality, the roll is random. The person has no control, but they act as if they do. Another example is someone picking lottery numbers based on birthdays or anniversaries. The numbers are drawn at random, yet people feel they have a better chance by choosing numbers with personal meaning. People also see patterns where none exist. A basketball player who makes several shots in a row may think they are on a hot streak. Fans believe the player has some control over whether the next shot will go in. Statistics show that a player's chance of making a shot remains the same regardless of past success. The belief in a hot streak is an illusion, but it feels real. The illusion of control appears in business settings. An executive may believe their decisions alone drive company success, ignoring factors like market trends, economic shifts, and consumer behavior. A manager might think that being more involved in every detail of an employee's work ensures success. Micromanaging creates stress for both the manager and the employee without actually improving results. The need to feel in control pushes people to take on too much responsibility. In personal life, people often believe they can control relationships. A person in a failing marriage may think that if they say the right things or act a certain way, they can make their partner stay. They ignore the other person's free will. Parents may believe they can shape every aspect of their child's future through discipline and planning, even though outside influences play a major role. The illusion of control leads to unrealistic expectations and disappointment. Superstitions stem from this thinking trap. Athletes wear lucky socks because they believe it affects their performance. Students use the same pencil for every test, thinking it helps them get good grades. People avoid walking under ladders or stepping on cracks to prevent bad luck. None of these actions change reality, but they provide comfort by creating a sense of control. The illusion of control is strong in health-related decisions. A person who eats well and exercises regularly may assume they can prevent illness. When they get sick, they feel betrayed by their efforts. While healthy habits reduce risk, they do not eliminate it. Another example is someone following home remedies instead of seeking medical treatment. They believe their own actions will cure them, even when evidence suggests otherwise. People also try to control outcomes in financial decisions. Investors believe they can predict the stock market by studying trends. While research helps, markets fluctuate due to many factors beyond one person's knowledge. Someone who buys a stock and sees it rise may assume they made the right choice based on skill. If it falls, they might blame bad luck instead of considering the limits of their control. Technology gives the illusion of control. Smart devices, apps, and automation make life easier, leading people to feel they can manage every aspect of their day. But unexpected events still happen. A phone battery dies, a software update causes issues, or a GPS sends someone the wrong way. The belief that technology eliminates uncertainty is false, but it influences how people interact with the world. The illusion of control appears in driving. Many drivers believe their skills keep them safe, underestimating external factors like road conditions, weather, and the actions of other drivers. A person may speed, assuming their experience allows them to avoid accidents. Another may get angry at traffic, believing they should have the power to make it move faster. These beliefs do not change reality, but they shape behavior. The workplace fosters this thinking trap. Leaders want to believe their strategies alone dictate success. Employees think hard work guarantees promotions. In reality, outside factors such as company policies, office politics, and market conditions play a role. The illusion of control makes failure feel personal, even when it is not. Stress and anxiety increase when people overestimate their control. A person facing a difficult situation may believe they can think their way out of it, even when no perfect solution exists. They may spend hours planning for every possible outcome, hoping to prevent failure. This mindset creates pressure and leads to frustration when things do not go as expected. In social situations, people assume they can control how others see them. They rehearse conversations, choose words carefully, and adjust body language to make the right impression. While preparation helps, they cannot control how others interpret their actions. Someone may dislike them for reasons beyond their knowledge or change their opinion over time. Trying to control another person's perception often leads to self-doubt and stress. Decision-making suffers when people believe they have more control than they do. A person choosing between two job offers may spend weeks analyzing details, believing they can predict which will lead to success. While research is important, unforeseen factors affect the outcome. Someone planning a vacation may check the weather daily, thinking it will help them pick the best time to go. Weather changes regardless of human effort, making their control over the situation limited. Marketing takes advantage of this thinking trap. Companies sell products that promise control over health, appearance, or success. Anti-aging creams claim to stop wrinkles, diet plans guarantee weight loss, and self-help books promise life transformation. While these products may help, they do not provide absolute control. The illusion makes people believe they can achieve perfect results if they make the right choices. People resist accepting randomness. They want to believe their actions matter in every situation. This belief provides comfort, even when it is false. It is difficult to accept that some things happen by chance or are influenced by forces beyond control. People would rather believe they made a mistake than admit an event was random. Understanding this thinking trap helps reduce stress. Recognizing that not everything is within personal control allows for better decision-making. It prevents overanalyzing situations, reduces frustration, and leads to more realistic expectations. People cannot control everything, but they can control how they respond to uncertainty. Some people believe they have no control over their lives. They think outside forces determine what happens to them. This belief is called the external control fallacy. It makes people feel powerless, like they are at the mercy of fate, luck, or other people's decisions. When someone falls into this way of thinking, they often stop trying to change their circumstances because they assume their efforts won't matter. They wait for things to improve instead of taking action. A person who believes they have no control may blame luck for their failures. If they don't get a job, they say it's because the company only hires people with connections. If they have a difficult relationship, they assume their partner is the problem and that there's nothing they can do to fix it. This thinking prevents them from seeing how their actions or choices contribute to their situations. Instead of looking at what they can change, they focus on what they cannot control. Imagine a student who gets a low grade on a test. If they fall into the external control fallacy, they might say the teacher made the test too hard or that the class is impossible to pass. They don't consider that they could have studied more or asked for help. This mindset keeps them stuck. They will likely keep struggling because they don't believe they can improve their situation. If instead, they recognize that they could have put in more effort, they might adjust their study habits and do better next time. This way of thinking often shows up in work settings. An employee who doesn't get promoted might say their boss plays favorites or that only people with the right connections move up. They ignore the fact that others who got promoted put in extra effort, took on more responsibility, or improved their skills. If they believe promotions are entirely out of their hands, they won't try to position themselves for advancement. They might stop working hard altogether because they don't see the point. Relationships also suffer when someone believes they have no control. A person who constantly fights with their partner might assume their partner is the problem. They won't consider how their own actions contribute to the conflict. If they believe their happiness depends on someone else changing, they won't take steps to improve communication or adjust their own behavior. This belief can lead to resentment, frustration, and ultimately, relationship failure. When both people in a relationship take responsibility for their part, they have a better chance of resolving conflicts and strengthening their bond. Another place this thinking appears is in health and fitness. Some people believe they can't lose weight because of their genetics or because they are too busy to exercise. They don't consider that small changes in diet and activity could make a difference. If they think their health is out of their control, they won't try to improve it. This belief keeps them from making better choices that could lead to a healthier life. People who take ownership of their health are more likely to make consistent efforts, even if progress is slow. The external control fallacy also affects emotions. Someone who believes others control their feelings will blame their mood on what people say or do. They might say a coworker ruined their day, or that a friend's comment made them feel worthless. This thinking takes away their power. Instead of managing their own emotions, they allow others to dictate how they feel. When someone realizes they have control over their reactions, they can handle difficult situations without being overwhelmed. They can choose to set boundaries, communicate better, or change how they respond. This fallacy is often reinforced by past experiences. A person who grew up in a strict household may have learned that they have no say in decisions. If they had controlling parents, they might carry that mindset into adulthood. They may believe authority figures or society determine their fate, so they don't even try to take control. They might not negotiate salaries, advocate for themselves, or pursue goals because they assume the outcome is predetermined. These past experiences shape how people see the world, but they don't have to define the future. Social influences also play a role. In some cultures, people are taught to accept their circumstances without questioning them. They might believe success depends on luck or that only certain people get ahead. These beliefs discourage action. If someone thinks they have no control over their success, they won't put in effort. But when they realize effort matters, they can change their approach. People who take initiative often create opportunities instead of waiting for them to appear. Fear can also reinforce the external control fallacy. Taking responsibility for one's life is difficult because it means accepting that failures are sometimes the result of personal choices. It's easier to believe outside forces are to blame. If a person admits they have control, they also have to admit they can do more to improve their situation. That realization can be uncomfortable, but avoiding responsibility keeps them from growing. People who acknowledge their own role in their circumstances can start making changes that lead to better outcomes. Breaking free from this fallacy requires a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on what cannot be controlled, people must identify what they can influence. Even in difficult situations, there are usually choices. A person who loses their job may not control the company's decision, but they can control how they respond. They can update their resume, apply for new jobs, or learn new skills. A student who fails a test can change their study habits. A person struggling in a relationship can work on their communication skills. Small changes lead to bigger results over time. One way to break this thinking pattern is to ask, what can I do to improve this situation? Shifting the focus from blame to action helps people regain a sense of control. Instead of thinking, this isn't fair, they can think, what step can I take next? This approach encourages problem solving rather than helplessness. When people take action, they feel more empowered, even if the results take time. Another useful strategy is to challenge negative thoughts. When someone thinks, I have no control, they can ask themselves, is that really true? Often, there is something they can do, even if it's small. Recognizing choices helps people build confidence in their ability to shape their lives. The more they take control, the more they realize they are not as powerless as they once believed. Taking responsibility does not mean ignoring real obstacles. Some challenges are beyond individual control, but that does not mean all control is lost. A person facing discrimination in the workplace may not be able to change company policies immediately, but they can document issues, seek support, or look for a better job. A person in a tough financial situation may not fix everything overnight, but they can take small steps towards stability. When people focus on what they can do rather than what they can't, they start to see progress. The external control fallacy keeps people stuck by making them believe they have no influence over their lives. When they shift their focus to what they can change, they start to see new possibilities. Even small efforts can lead to big improvements over time. The key is recognizing that while not everything is within control, many things are. By focusing on those areas, people can create better outcomes and build a stronger sense of personal power. Labeling happens when you define yourself or others based on one action or trait instead of the whole person. It's when you take a single event and turn it into an identity. If you fail a test, you might call yourself stupid. If someone makes a mistake, you might call them unreliable. Instead of seeing mistakes as moments, labeling makes them permanent. This way of thinking limits people. It reduces a person to one characteristic, stripping away complexity. Imagine a man who misses a deadline at work. His boss calls him lazy. The man stays late most nights and works hard, but because of one mistake, his boss labels him as someone who doesn't care. The label sticks. The boss starts treating him differently. The man might even start believing it himself. He may stop putting in effort because he now thinks, I'm just a lazy person. Labeling turns a mistake into an identity. People label themselves harshly. A woman struggling to lose weight calls herself undisciplined. A student who stumbles through a presentation says he's terrible at public speaking. These thoughts feel final. They ignore growth and effort. The woman might have made progress but disregards it because the label stays. The student might improve with practice, but if he believes the label, he won't try. Labels aren't always negative. Calling yourself a perfectionist can seem positive, but even positive labels can trap you. If someone identifies as a perfectionist, they might avoid tasks where they could fail. They fear anything less than perfect will make them something else, something worse. If you believe you're smart, failure can shake you. You might avoid challenges to protect that label. Labeling affects how people see others. A child in school who acts out once might get called a troublemaker. Even if he behaves well afterward, teachers and students might still see him that way. When people label others, they stop seeing the full person. They only notice behaviors that confirm the label. A boss who thinks an employee is unreliable will overlook times when the employee meets deadlines. A friend who believes someone is selfish will ignore moments of generosity. Once applied, labels are hard to shake. They shape expectations. If a person hears a label often enough, they might start to believe it. A child who is always told he is bad may stop trying to behave well. A woman who is always told she is shy may avoid speaking up even when she wants to. Labels create self-fulfilling prophecies. People act in ways that reinforce them. Labeling often ignores context. If someone cuts you off in traffic, you might call them a jerk, but maybe they are rushing to the hospital. If a friend cancels plans, you might call them unreliable, but maybe they are struggling with something personal. Labels assume behavior comes from personality, not from circumstances. They simplify situations that are often more complex. Changing labeling means shifting focus. Instead of saying, "I'm terrible at this," say, "I struggled with this task." Instead of saying, "She's selfish," say, "She didn't consider my feelings this time." Words matter. How you describe a situation shapes how you see it. Small changes in language create space for growth. Mistakes become learning opportunities. Behavior becomes separate from identity. People resist dropping labels because they provide certainty. If someone is just a bad person, you don't have to understand them. If you are just bad at math, you don't have to try. Labels remove the need to think deeper. They simplify people and situations, but in doing so, they distort reality. Challenging labels starts with awareness. Notice when you use them. Ask if they are fair. Look for evidence that contradicts them. If you believe you're bad at something, find times when you did well. If you've labeled someone else, watch for times when they don't fit that label. Be open to change. People grow. Mistakes don't define someone forever. Labeling isn't about accuracy, it's about ease. It's easier to use a single word than to acknowledge complexity. But reality isn't simple. People aren't one thing. Letting go of labels means seeing the full picture. It means allowing room for change. Mislabeling happens when people use exaggerated or emotionally charged words to describe themselves, others, or situations. Instead of seeing a mistake as just a mistake, they might call themselves a failure. Instead of thinking of someone as having made a bad choice, they might label them as a terrible person. These labels often stick in the mind and shape how people see the world. A person who mislabels often lets emotions control their judgment. If they fail a test, they may think, "I'm an idiot," rather than, "I didn't study enough for this test." If they make a mistake at work, they might tell themselves, "I'm completely incompetent," instead of, "I need to improve in this area." These labels become self-fulfilling because once someone believes a negative label about themselves, they start acting in ways that reinforce it. Mislabeling isn't just about self-judgment. It also affects how people view others. If a friend forgets to return a call, someone prone to mislabeling might say, "They are so selfish," rather than considering that their friend may have been busy or distracted. If a coworker makes an error, they might think they're useless at their job, instead of, "They made a mistake this time." This kind of labeling makes it hard to give people the benefit of the doubt or see their actions in a balanced way. One way mislabeling shapes relationships is through arguments. If two people argue and one person mislabels the other, they might say, "You're always so rude," instead of saying, "That comment felt disrespectful." This makes it harder to resolve conflict. When people use extreme words to describe someone, the other person often becomes defensive, and the argument escalates. Over time, these labels stick, making it hard to see people beyond the words used to describe them. Mislabeling is especially harmful in parenting. A child who hears things like, "You're such a troublemaker," or "You're lazy," starts to believe those labels. Even if the child is just having a bad day or struggling in a specific area, the label becomes part of their identity. They may stop trying to change because they assume that's just who they are. Instead of hearing that they forgot to clean their room this time, they hear that they are a messy person. Instead of understanding that they need to try harder in school, they hear that they are stupid. This affects self-esteem and future behavior. This type of thinking is also common in relationships. If someone believes they are unlovable because of past experiences, they may mislabel themselves as damaged or not worth it. Even if a partner treats them well, they might still believe that negative label. If they have an argument, they might think, "This proves I'm impossible to love," rather than seeing the disagreement as a normal part of a relationship. The words people use in their own minds shape how they act and react. Mislabeling is closely linked to other thinking traps. It overlaps with black and white thinking because it ignores nuance. If someone labels themselves as a complete failure, they aren't considering all the things they've done well. If they label someone as a bad friend, they aren't thinking about the times that person has been supportive. It also connects to catastrophizing. When someone uses extreme labels, they make the situation seem much worse than it actually is. Social media has made mislabeling more common. Online, people tend to judge others quickly and harshly. If someone shares an unpopular opinion, they might be labeled as ignorant or toxic, rather than just seen as someone with a different perspective. If someone makes a mistake, they may be called canceled or problematic without any discussion of the context. The speed of the internet encourages snap judgments, and once a label sticks, it is hard to remove. In work settings, mislabeling can affect career growth. If someone struggles with a task, they might tell themselves, "I'm terrible at this job," instead of, "I need more practice with this skill." If a manager mislabels an employee as lazy based on one mistake, they may overlook the employee's strengths. This kind of thinking makes it difficult to give or receive fair feedback. It also leads to imposter syndrome, where people believe they don't deserve their success because they have labeled themselves as not good enough. Changing mislabeling starts with awareness. Instead of immediately assigning a harsh label, it helps to slow down and describe the situation more accurately. If someone makes a mistake, they can reframe their thinking by saying, "I got this wrong, but I can learn from it," instead of, "I always mess things up." If a friend cancels plans, they can think, "Maybe they are busy," rather than, "They don't care about me." Small changes in language make a big difference in how people feel and respond. Another way to challenge mislabeling is by looking for counterexamples. If someone thinks, "I'm bad at everything," they can ask themselves, "Is that really true?" If they reflect, they will likely find areas where they do well. If they believe, "Nobody likes me," they can think about people who have shown kindness toward them. This helps break the habit of applying extreme labels to every situation. Practicing self-compassion also helps. If someone wouldn't say a certain label to a friend, they shouldn't say it to themselves. A person wouldn't tell a friend, "You are completely worthless," just because they made a mistake. So why say it to themselves? Replacing harsh labels with more balanced thinking makes it easier to grow and improve. Over time, changing the habit of mislabeling leads to a more accurate and fair way of thinking. It allows people to see themselves and others in a more balanced light. They can still recognize problems and mistakes, but they do so without adding unnecessary negativity. Instead of carrying the weight of extreme labels, they focus on actions and solutions. Hindsight bias happens when people believe they knew something would happen before it actually did. They look back at an event and think the outcome was obvious. This can lead to overconfidence in judgment and decision-making. It affects individuals in everyday life, professionals in various fields, and even entire societies when reflecting on history. Imagine a football game where a team wins in the last few seconds. Fans might say they always knew that team would win, but before the last-minute play, they were nervous and unsure. The bias changes their memory, making them believe they had more certainty than they did. This effect makes people underestimate uncertainty and risk. It creates a false sense of predictability in events that were actually unpredictable. Hindsight bias appears in business decisions. A manager makes a risky investment and it succeeds. Later, they say they knew it was the right decision all along. They forget about the doubts they had before. This bias makes people overlook the factors that could have led to failure. If the investment had failed, the same manager might have said it was obvious from the start. The mind adjusts past thinking to fit the current outcome. Medical professionals experience hindsight bias when reviewing diagnoses. A doctor looks at a misdiagnosed patient's file and believes the mistake should have been clear. The doctor forgets that at the time, symptoms pointed to multiple possible conditions. This bias creates unfair judgments of past decisions. It can make professionals too critical of their own or others' past choices, even when those choices were reasonable given the information available. Legal professionals deal with hindsight bias in court cases. Jurors deciding negligence cases often believe an accident was foreseeable. They hear all the details after the fact and assume they would have seen the risk. A company fails to fix a safety issue and an injury happens. The jury believes the company should have known it would lead to harm. But before the incident, the risk might not have been obvious. This bias makes fair judgment harder because it distorts past perspectives. Hindsight bias also appears in personal relationships. Someone might look back on a failed relationship and think the warning signs were clear. But during the relationship, those signs may not have stood out. The bias makes people think they ignored obvious red flags when, in reality, they were making decisions based on the information available at the time. This can lead to unnecessary guilt or frustration. Financial markets provide another example. Investors believe they knew a stock would rise or fall after it happens. They forget their initial doubts or alternative predictions. A person hears about a company's success and thinks it was predictable. But before the company grew, many other outcomes were possible. Hindsight bias makes people believe past events were more certain than they actually were, leading to overconfidence in future investments. This bias also affects historical events. When looking back on wars, political changes, or economic crises, people think the outcomes were inevitable. They believe the signs were clear. But before the event, those signs were mixed with uncertainty. This changes how history is understood. It can make people unfairly judge past leaders or societies for not acting differently when, at the time, the right course of action was unclear. Sports provide many examples of hindsight bias. A coach makes a risky decision, and it works. Fans say they knew it was a great call. If it fails, they say it was obviously a bad decision. But before the play, the outcome was uncertain. The bias makes people believe results were more predictable than they actually were. It affects how players, coaches, and fans interpret past choices. This bias influences how people view their own past decisions. Someone might look back at a career choice and believe they always knew it was the right move. But at the time, they had doubts. This distorts how people learn from experience. It can make them believe they have better judgment than they actually do, leading to overconfidence in future decisions. Hindsight bias can cause problems in risk assessment. A company implements a safety measure after an accident. People believe the risk was obvious all along. But before the accident, the risk might not have seemed clear. This bias can lead to unfair blame. It makes decision makers more hesitant to take risks, even when risks are necessary for progress. It also affects how people evaluate warnings. A disaster happens and people believe the warning signs were clear, but before the event, those signs were mixed with uncertainty. This bias makes it hard to judge whether warnings were sufficient. It can lead to excessive blame or unnecessary fear of future risks. Hindsight bias influences memory. People remember their past predictions as more accurate than they actually were. A student takes a test and thinks they knew all the answers they got right, but before the test, they were unsure. The bias makes them forget their doubts. This can affect how they prepare for future exams, leading to overconfidence. This bias also affects how people view medical advancements. A treatment becomes standard, and people believe its success was obvious. But before the research, many other possibilities existed. Scientists had to test multiple options before finding the right one. Hindsight bias makes discoveries seem more predictable than they were, which can distort how people understand scientific progress. Social media amplifies hindsight bias. A news story breaks, and people say they saw it coming, but before the event, they might not have considered that possibility. The bias makes people believe they are better at predicting events than they actually are. This can lead to misinformation and overconfidence in opinions. Hindsight bias can make people less empathetic. When someone fails, others believe the failure was obvious. They think the person should have seen it coming, but at the time, the situation may have been complex. This bias makes it harder to understand other people's mistakes. It can lead to harsh judgments and reduced willingness to help others learn from failure. People experience hindsight bias in their health choices. Someone quits smoking and believes they always knew it was a bad habit. But before quitting, they may have justified it in different ways. This bias changes how they view past behavior. It can also make it harder to understand why others struggle with change. Hindsight bias shapes how people view technological changes. A company introduces a new product, and it succeeds. People believe its success was obvious. But before its release, many doubted its potential. This bias makes technological advancements seem more predictable than they were. It can lead to unrealistic expectations for future innovations. It also affects how people evaluate political decisions. A leader makes a controversial choice, and the outcome is good. People believe it was obviously the right decision. If the outcome is bad, they believe failure was inevitable. But before the decision, the outcome was uncertain. This bias makes political judgment less objective. Hindsight bias impacts personal learning. A person reflects on a mistake and believes they should have seen it coming. But at the time, they lacked key information. This bias makes learning from experience more difficult. It can lead to excessive regret or overconfidence in future decisions. This bias influences how organizations handle failures. A company launches a project that fails. Leaders believe the failure was obvious. They forget the reasons they believed in the project at the start. This bias makes risk-taking harder. It discourages innovation because people fear being judged unfairly in hindsight. Hindsight bias affects how people interpret advice. Someone gives guidance, and it works. The person receiving it believes they always knew it was good advice. If it fails, they believe the advice was obviously bad. But before the outcome, the right choice was unclear. This bias makes people misjudge the value of past advice. It also influences how people view their instincts. Someone follows their gut feeling, and it leads to success. They believe they always knew it was the right choice. If it fails, they believe they ignored clear signs of danger. But at the time, the choice was uncertain. This bias makes people either overtrust or doubt their instincts based on past outcomes. People want to believe the world is fair. They want to think good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. This belief makes life feel predictable and just. But the world does not always work that way. The just world fallacy is the tendency to assume people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. It is a way to make sense of events, but it often leads to flawed thinking and unfair judgments. This mindset can shape how people react to success and failure. If someone achieves something great, others might assume they worked hard and earned it. If someone suffers a misfortune, others might assume they did something wrong. This assumption helps maintain the illusion that life is orderly and fair, but it ignores the complexity of real-world circumstances. Many factors influence outcomes, including luck, privilege, and systemic issues beyond individual control. People often use the just world fallacy to explain poverty. They may believe poor people are lazy or made bad choices, even when external forces like economic downturns, discrimination, or medical emergencies play a role. If a person loses their job, outsiders may assume they were incompetent instead of considering factors like company downsizing. If someone struggles with addiction, others may assume they lack willpower rather than recognizing the impact of genetics, trauma, or mental health conditions. Crime is another area where this fallacy appears. Victims of theft, fraud, or assault sometimes face scrutiny instead of sympathy. People might say they should have been more careful, should not have walked alone, or should not have trusted others. This reaction shifts the focus away from the wrongdoer and onto the victim. It provides a false sense of security, allowing others to believe bad things will not happen to them as long as they make the right choices. In reality, crime can happen to anyone, regardless of their actions. The just world fallacy also shows up in health-related situations. People with chronic illnesses or terminal diagnoses may face judgment instead of support. Others may assume they did not take care of themselves or made poor lifestyle choices. While some health conditions have risk factors tied to behavior, many result from genetics, environmental exposure, or sheer bad luck. Blaming the person for their illness can lead to isolation and shame instead of understanding and medical support. This fallacy appears in workplace dynamics as well. Employees who receive promotions or recognition are often seen as the most deserving, but office politics, favoritism, and networking play a significant role in career advancement. A talented worker who is overlooked might not have done anything wrong, yet others might assume they did not try hard enough. This thinking reinforces existing power structures, making it harder for people in disadvantaged positions to succeed. People also apply this fallacy in education. A student who excels in school is assumed to be intelligent and hardworking, while a struggling student is often viewed as lazy or incapable. Factors such as family support, access to resources, and mental health challenges get ignored. The assumption that effort alone determines success leads to misplaced judgment and unrealistic expectations. Media plays a role in reinforcing the just world fallacy. Stories often depict heroes who earn rewards and villains who face consequences. Fictional narratives create a sense of closure, making justice feel inevitable. In reality, injustice happens every day. Hardworking people struggle, while dishonest individuals thrive. Media portrayals that emphasize fairness make it harder for people to accept that life does not always reward virtue or punish wrongdoing. Cultural upbringing influences this mindset as well. Many religions and philosophies teach that good deeds lead to positive outcomes and bad deeds bring suffering. These teachings offer moral guidance, but they can also lead to victim blaming. If someone experiences hardship, others may believe they are being punished for past actions. This belief can prevent people from offering help, assuming instead that the suffering person needs to learn a lesson or correct their behavior. Legal systems are supposed to uphold fairness, but even they fall prey to the just world fallacy. People assume the innocent go free and the guilty get punished, yet wrongful convictions and biased rulings happen regularly. Those who cannot afford strong legal representation face worse outcomes than wealthier defendants. People often trust the system more than they should, assuming justice will prevail, when in reality, many factors influence legal outcomes beyond guilt or innocence. One of the most damaging effects of this fallacy is its impact on empathy. When people believe the world is inherently fair, they are less likely to feel compassion for those in difficult situations. They may assume others brought their problems on themselves, leading to indifference instead of support. This thinking discourages collective action to address social issues, making it harder to create meaningful change. Cognitive biases reinforce the just world fallacy. People look for patterns in random events, seeking explanations that fit their existing beliefs. When they see someone struggling, they search for reasons that justify the outcome, rather than considering chance or systemic inequality. This tendency makes it difficult to challenge the fallacy, as it aligns with the human desire for order and predictability. Overcoming this mindset requires awareness and effort. People must recognize that life is unpredictable and that many factors influence outcomes. Instead of assuming individuals always get what they deserve, they should consider context and external influences. Practicing empathy, questioning assumptions, and seeking diverse perspectives can help break free from this flawed way of thinking. The just world fallacy is comforting because it offers a sense of control. It allows people to believe they can avoid misfortune by making the right choices. But reality does not always work that way. Understanding this can lead to greater fairness, empathy, and a more accurate view of the world. Challenging this fallacy helps create a society that acknowledges complexity and supports those in need instead of blaming them for their circumstances. People often think that the world is more dangerous than it really is. They believe threats are bigger, more common, or more likely than they actually are. This thinking trap, called overestimation of danger, makes people feel more fear than they should. It can lead to avoiding things that are safe or worrying too much about situations that are unlikely to happen. It affects everyday choices and can limit what people do in life. A person who overestimates danger might think flying is extremely risky. They imagine a plane crash whenever they board a flight. They feel certain that something will go wrong, even though statistics show air travel is one of the safest ways to get from one place to another. Their fear is not based on reality, but on how they perceive the situation. News reports of rare plane crashes strengthen their belief. They do not think about how millions of people fly safely every day. Instead, they focus on the small chance of disaster. This fear may cause them to avoid flying altogether. They take long road trips instead, even though driving is much more dangerous than flying. People who fear crime often make similar mistakes. They may believe violent crime is increasing, even when data shows it is dropping. They hear about crime on the news and assume it happens everywhere. They avoid going out at night or stay away from certain areas, even if those places are safe. They might install expensive security systems or carry weapons, convinced they need protection at all times. The fear is not based on personal experience, but on stories that make crime seem more common than it is. Parents sometimes overestimate danger when it comes to their children. They believe strangers are constantly trying to kidnap kids. They picture worst-case scenarios and take extreme precautions. They avoid parks or public places because they think it is unsafe. They do not let their children walk to school, even though statistics show most child abductions involve someone the child knows, not a stranger. Their fear does not match reality, but it still influences their decisions. The way media presents information makes overestimating danger easy. News focuses on rare, dramatic events rather than common everyday ones. Plane crashes, murders, and natural disasters get more coverage than safe flights, peaceful neighborhoods, or uneventful days. This constant exposure makes people think rare events happen often. Watching too much news can make someone feel like the world is dangerous, even when they have never experienced crime or disaster personally. People also struggle with probability. They have a hard time understanding risk in numbers. If they hear there is a 1 in a million chance of something happening, they may not recognize how small that risk is. Instead, they focus on the fact that it could happen. They might hear about a rare side effect of a medication and refuse to take it, even if the medicine could save their life. They fear the rare event more than they value the likely benefit. Overestimating danger can affect health decisions too. Some people avoid medical treatments because they focus on rare risks. They refuse vaccines because they heard about one case of a bad reaction, ignoring the millions of people who benefit. They avoid surgeries that could improve their lives because they fear complications, even though those complications are uncommon. Their fear leads them to make choices that might not be best for their health. This thinking trap can also appear in social situations. Someone who fears rejection may believe people dislike them, even without evidence. They may avoid speaking up in meetings or refuse to approach new people. They imagine embarrassing situations that are unlikely to happen. They assume others will judge them harshly. They do not consider the possibility that people might be friendly or understanding. Their fear of a bad outcome stops them from taking social risks that could improve their life. People who overestimate danger often change their behavior in ways that reinforce their fear. If someone believes a neighborhood is unsafe, they will avoid it. Since they never go there, they never see that it is actually safe. Their belief remains strong because they never test it. The same happens with other fears. If someone avoids flying, they never get a chance to realize that flights are usually smooth and uneventful. Avoidance strengthens the fear instead of reducing it. The way memories work can also play a role. People remember scary events more clearly than ordinary ones. If someone has a bad experience, they think about it often. They replay it in their mind and focus on the details. Meanwhile, they forget all the times things went smoothly. If someone was in a minor car accident once, they might think driving is dangerous, even if they have driven safely for years. They remember the crash more than all the times they arrived safely. Some people are naturally more cautious than others. Their personalities make them more aware of risks. They may have experienced trauma in the past, which makes them more sensitive to danger. They might have grown up in an environment where fear was common. These factors can make someone more likely to overestimate threats. They see the world as a place where bad things happen often, even if that is not true. Overestimation of danger can lead to unnecessary stress. Constant worry about unlikely dangers takes up mental energy. It can cause anxiety and make people feel on edge. They might have trouble relaxing because they are always thinking about what could go wrong. Their bodies stay in a state of tension, which can lead to health problems over time. Chronic stress affects sleep, digestion, and the immune system. It can make life less enjoyable. This thinking trap can also hold people back from opportunities. If someone believes a new job is too risky, they might stay in a job they dislike. If they think traveling is too dangerous, they might never see new places. If they believe relationships are full of potential hurt, they might avoid dating. Their fear stops them from doing things that could bring happiness or success. They limit their own potential because they focus too much on what could go wrong. Challenging overestimation of danger requires looking at facts. People can ask themselves how likely a feared event actually is. They can research statistics instead of relying on feelings. They can seek out real experiences instead of assuming the worst. They can remind themselves of times when things went well instead of only remembering bad experiences. They can test their fears by taking small steps outside their comfort zone. Exposure to the things they fear can help them see that danger is not as common as they believed. Avoiding unnecessary fear does not mean ignoring real risks. It means recognizing the difference between likely dangers and rare ones. It means making decisions based on reality, not fear. It means understanding that the world is not as scary as it sometimes seems. It means not letting fear control choices. When people stop overestimating danger, they can live with more confidence and less worry. People often doubt their own abilities even when they have the skills and experience to succeed. This happens because of past failures, fear of judgment, or a habit of comparing themselves to others. A person might be qualified for a job but hesitate to apply because they believe they aren't good enough. A student might understand the material but assume they will fail the test. A musician might practice for years but think they aren't ready for an audience. These are examples of underestimating ability, a thinking trap that holds people back from taking opportunities and growing. A person's mind creates barriers that aren't real. They think, "I can't do this," even when they have done similar things before. If they struggle once, they assume they will always struggle. They might get a math problem wrong and believe they are bad at math. They might fumble a public speech and decide they can never be a good speaker. They forget that learning happens through mistakes and that failure does not mean inability. Many people learn to ride a bike by falling. They get up, try again, and improve. But in other areas of life, they let one failure define them. Experience does not always fix this problem. Even skilled professionals question themselves. A lawyer who has won many cases may feel unqualified to take on a high-profile client. A doctor who has performed dozens of surgeries may feel nervous before a complicated procedure. An athlete who trains every day might worry they will choke in a competition. These people have evidence of their abilities, but their minds tell them otherwise. The fear of failing overshadows their past success. Social comparison makes it worse. When people see others excel, they assume those people are naturally talented while ignoring the hard work behind their success. They think, "She's just good at this," or "He was born with that skill." They don't see the hours of effort, practice, and setbacks those individuals endured. A writer might read a best-selling novel and feel discouraged, thinking they could never create something as good. They don't realize that the author probably wrote multiple drafts, faced rejections, and edited extensively before publishing the final book. Seeing only the end result makes their own progress feel slow and inadequate. Another factor is the way people frame their achievements. When they succeed, they credit luck, easy circumstances, or help from others. When they fail, they blame themselves. This imbalance makes them believe their victories don't count, while their mistakes prove their incompetence. If they pass a test, they might think the questions were easy. If they get a promotion, they might assume no one else wanted the job. But if they fail, they tell themselves, "I'm not smart enough," or "I don't have what it takes." They dismiss their strengths and exaggerate their weaknesses. Memories reinforce this pattern. The brain stores negative experiences more vividly than positive ones. If someone has a bad performance, that moment sticks in their mind longer than times they did well. A person might forget about all the speeches they delivered smoothly, but remember the one where they stumbled. They might recall a single rejection more than the compliments they received. Their mind pulls these bad memories to the surface whenever they face a new challenge, making them hesitant to try again. Society contributes to this problem by rewarding perfection. Schools expect students to get the right answers. Workplaces demand efficiency. Social media highlights polished success stories. Mistakes and struggles are hidden. This creates pressure to be great immediately, without room for trial and error. A person who isn't perfect assumes they aren't good enough, instead of seeing themselves as a work in progress. They don't realize that even experts make mistakes. A chef might burn a dish. A scientist might get an experiment wrong. A programmer might write faulty code. but those mistakes do not define their abilities. Underestimating ability can cause missed opportunities. A person may not apply for their dream job because they assume they won't get it. A student may not enter a competition because they think they won't win. A leader may not take on a new project because they fear they won't succeed. These decisions shape their lives. When they step back from challenges, they reinforce their doubts. Each time they avoid trying, they strengthen the belief that they aren't capable. This cycle keeps them from reaching their full potential. Confidence does not mean knowing everything. It means being willing to learn and improve. People often believe they need to feel ready before they take action, but action comes first. A new teacher may not feel completely prepared on their first day, but they grow into the role by doing the job. A writer may not think their first draft is good, but they improve through revisions. A speaker may feel nervous before stepping on stage, but they gain confidence by speaking more often. Waiting for confidence before acting is a mistake. Confidence builds through experience, not before it. Breaking free from this thinking trap requires recognizing and challenging self-doubt. People can start by questioning their negative thoughts. If they think, "I'm not good at this," they should ask themselves, "What evidence do I have?" They should list their experiences, skills, and past successes. Writing down accomplishments can make them more real. Keeping a record of achievements helps counterbalance the brain's tendency to focus on failures. Reframing mistakes is also important. Instead of seeing failure as proof of incompetence, people should view it as a step in learning. Athletes analyze their losses to improve their performance. Musicians practice their weak spots to get better. Scientists adjust their methods after failed experiments. The same applies to everyday skills. If someone struggles with presentations, they can practice speaking in smaller groups. If they find writing difficult, they can start with short pieces and build from there. Growth happens through effort, not immediate perfection. Another way to fight underestimation is to stop comparing beginnings to someone else's peak. A new artist might look at a master's work and feel discouraged, but they are seeing the result of years of practice, not the starting point. Comparing a first attempt to someone's best work is unfair. Instead, they should look at their own progress. If they improve over time, they are moving in the right direction. Surrounding oneself with supportive people can also help. Encouragement from mentors, friends, or colleagues provides an outside perspective that counters self-doubt. Hearing "you're good at this" from others can be a reminder that ability is real. But at the same time, external validation should not be the only source of confidence. Self-belief needs to come from recognizing one's own effort and progress. It also helps to take action before feeling ready. Instead of waiting for confidence, people should focus on preparation and practice. A student who wants to join a debate team but feels unqualified should start attending meetings to learn. An employee who hesitates to take a leadership role should begin by speaking up in meetings. Small steps lead to greater confidence over time. Success is built through action, not just positive thinking. People who underestimate their abilities often achieve less than they could, not because they lack talent, but because they hold themselves back. They assume they aren't ready, aren't skilled enough, or won't succeed. They ignore their progress and see only their shortcomings. But ability grows with use. The more they step forward, take risks, and practice, the more they realize they are capable. The greatest limit is not their actual skill, but their belief in themselves. Fear of rejection makes people avoid situations where they might be turned down, criticized, or ignored. It can shape decisions, limit opportunities, and affect personal and professional growth. People with this fear hesitate to speak up, share ideas, or take risks. They worry about being excluded, judged, or disliked. This fear often starts early and grows stronger over time. Imagine a student who wants to join a club but doesn't sign up because they fear being laughed at. They assume others won't accept them, so they stay away. Over time, they miss out on social connections and experiences. At work, an employee hesitates to ask for a raise because they think their boss will say no. Instead of negotiating, they stay silent, feeling stuck and undervalued. In relationships, someone avoids dating because they fear rejection. They assume any sign of hesitation from another person means they are unwanted. This fear often stems from past experiences. A child who was bullied at school might grow up believing they aren't good enough. If a parent was overly critical, a child might develop a deep-seated belief that they will always fall short. These early experiences shape how people react to new situations. When someone has been rejected before, they often expect it to happen again. This leads to avoidance and self-doubt. The mind creates worst-case scenarios. Before even trying, a person convinces themselves that failure is inevitable. They imagine being embarrassed, laughed at, or dismissed. These thoughts feel real, even when there is no actual danger. The brain treats social rejection as a threat, triggering stress responses. The heart races, palms sweat, and muscles tense. Instead of seeing rejection as a normal part of life, it feels overwhelming. People respond to this fear in different ways. Some withdraw completely, avoiding social situations, job opportunities, or new experiences. They prefer to stay in their comfort zone where they feel safe. Others become people pleasers, always seeking approval. They say yes when they want to say no, fearing that disagreement will lead to rejection. Some overcompensate by acting overly confident or dismissive, pretending rejection doesn't bother them while secretly feeling hurt. Social media amplifies this fear. People compare themselves to others, assuming they are less attractive, less successful, or less interesting. A post without likes feels like rejection. A delayed text response triggers panic. The digital world creates a constant loop of seeking approval. When people rely on external validation, they become more vulnerable to rejection. They measure self-worth based on reactions from others. Fear of rejection affects self-esteem. When someone avoids situations where rejection is possible, they reinforce the belief that they aren't worthy. Over time, this becomes a cycle. The more they avoid rejection, the more power it gains. Small rejections feel massive. A declined invitation, a job rejection, or a friend canceling plans becomes proof that they are unworthy. This fear makes it difficult to form deep connections. When someone holds back out of fear, they limit their ability to build trust. Relationships remain surface level because vulnerability feels too risky. Self-doubt plays a big role. When rejection feels personal, it damages confidence. Instead of seeing it as part of life, it becomes a statement of worth. If one job application gets rejected, a person assumes they aren't talented. If a date doesn't lead to a second meeting, they believe they aren't attractive. The mind distorts reality, turning small events into absolute truths. Exposure to rejection helps reduce this fear. When someone experiences rejection and realizes they can handle it, the fear weakens. A person who applies to multiple jobs and faces rejection eventually sees it as normal. They stop taking it personally. A writer who submits articles and gets turned down learns that rejection is part of growth. Athletes lose games, musicians face criticism, and entrepreneurs hear no before they hear yes. Every success story includes rejection. The difference is how people interpret it. Building resilience starts with changing perception. Instead of seeing rejection as failure, it helps to see it as feedback. A rejected job application doesn't mean a person isn't skilled. It might mean the employer found someone with different qualifications. A declined invitation doesn't mean someone is unlikable. The other person might be busy or dealing with personal issues. Rejection says more about circumstances than about worth. Practicing rejection reduces its power. Some people use rejection therapy, intentionally seeking small rejections to desensitize themselves. They ask for discounts at stores, request favors from strangers, or apply for opportunities they know are unlikely. Each rejection makes the next one easier. Over time, rejection becomes less frightening. Developing a strong sense of self helps. When people base their confidence on internal values rather than external validation, rejection loses its grip. A person who knows their worth doesn't need constant approval. They recognize that not everyone will like them, and that's okay. They focus on their strengths rather than their fears. Fear of rejection can also be managed by reframing thoughts. Instead of thinking, "I'm not good enough," a person can think, "This wasn't the right fit." Instead of assuming rejection is personal, they can see it as part of life. Challenging negative thoughts reduces their impact. Writing down fears and questioning them helps separate perception from reality. Taking small risks builds confidence. Someone who avoids social situations might start by making small interactions, like greeting a stranger or joining a casual conversation. An employee who fears asking for a raise can start by speaking up in meetings. A person hesitant to date can practice initiating small conversations. Each small step reduces fear. Support systems make a difference. Talking to trusted friends, mentors, or therapists provides perspective. They offer reassurance and remind people that rejection happens to everyone. Knowing others have faced similar experiences makes rejection feel less isolating. Encouragement from others strengthens confidence. Self-compassion matters. Instead of being harsh on themselves after rejection, people can practice kindness. Acknowledging feelings without judgment helps reduce their impact. Treating oneself as a friend rather than a critic makes a difference. Fear of rejection is common, but it doesn't have to control decisions. When people understand where this fear comes from and take steps to face it, they gain freedom. They open themselves to new experiences, relationships, and opportunities. The discomfort of rejection fades, replaced by confidence and resilience. Dependency thinking happens when people believe they cannot function or succeed without help from others. They might feel they need constant support, approval, or guidance to make decisions or complete tasks. This way of thinking often develops over time, shaped by experiences in childhood, relationships, or work environments where independence was discouraged or where failure was met with harsh criticism. Imagine someone who grew up in a household where parents made every decision for them. They never had to choose their own clothes, plan their schedule, or solve problems on their own. When they became adults, they felt lost when faced with decisions. Instead of weighing options and making choices, they constantly sought reassurance from others. If they had a problem at work, they would ask colleagues what to do, instead of thinking through solutions. If they needed to buy a car, they would let someone else decide which model to get. This is a clear example of dependency thinking. Another way this mindset develops is through past failures. A person who has made mistakes in the past might fear making decisions on their own. They may believe they are not capable of making the right choice, so they look to others to guide them. If they once invested money and lost it, they may refuse to manage their own finances, always relying on a family member or financial advisor to make every decision. If they experienced a bad relationship, they may believe they cannot trust their own judgment in choosing a partner, so they let friends or family influence their decisions. Over time, this reliance becomes a habit, reinforcing the belief that they are not capable on their own. This way of thinking can also be reinforced by society. In some cultures, dependence on authority figures is encouraged. People are taught to follow instructions rather than think independently. In strict corporate environments, employees may feel discouraged from making decisions without approval from higher-ups. Over time, this conditioning creates individuals who hesitate to take initiative, fearing mistakes or rejection. When faced with an important task, they wait for instructions rather than taking action. When given an opportunity, they second-guess themselves rather than stepping forward. Dependency thinking affects confidence and self-esteem. When people constantly look to others for guidance, they fail to build trust in their own judgment. They may believe they are incapable of solving problems, which makes them anxious when they are forced to act independently. This can lead to avoidance behaviors. Instead of taking responsibility, they may procrastinate or find excuses to pass decisions onto someone else. If someone asks them for input, they may deflect the question saying, "I don't know, what do you think?" or "I'll do whatever you decide." Over time, this weakens their ability to think critically and solve problems. People who struggle with dependency thinking often have difficulty setting boundaries. Because they feel they need others, they may fear conflict or rejection. This can lead them to agree to things they do not want to do. If a friend asks for a favor, they say yes, even if it is inconvenient. If a boss gives them extra work, they accept it without question. They may also struggle with saying no in personal relationships, allowing others to control their time and decisions. This can lead to feelings of resentment, frustration, and burnout. But because they believe they need others, they feel powerless to change the situation. Relationships can suffer when dependency thinking takes hold. A person who believes they cannot function alone may become clingy or overly reliant on a partner. They may expect constant reassurance, needing frequent validation that they are loved and valued. This can put pressure on the other person, making the relationship feel one-sided. The dependent person may also struggle to make decisions within the relationship. Instead of expressing opinions, they defer to their partner. If asked what they want to eat, they say, "Whatever you want." If asked about future plans, they respond, "I don't know, you decide." Over time, this dynamic can create frustration, as one person bears the weight of decision-making while the other avoids responsibility. Friendships can also be affected. A person with dependency thinking may rely on friends for constant emotional support. They may frequently seek advice, always asking what to do rather than forming their own opinions. While friends may want to help, this can become exhausting. If one friend always leans on the other, it can create an imbalance where one person feels responsible for the other's happiness. This can lead to tension or even the end of the friendship. Work performance can suffer when dependency thinking is present. An employee who lacks confidence in their abilities may struggle to complete tasks without guidance. They may ask excessive questions, seeking reassurance before taking any action. Instead of problem solving, they may constantly check with a supervisor, slowing down productivity. This hesitation can make them appear less competent, even if they are capable. Managers may grow frustrated with their lack of initiative, which can affect career growth and opportunities. Promotions often require independent thinking and decision-making, so an employee who relies too much on others may find themselves overlooked for advancement. Breaking free from dependency thinking requires a shift in mindset. It starts with recognizing when and why a person seeks external validation. If someone constantly asks for reassurance, they can pause and ask themselves if they truly need input or if they already have enough information to decide. They can practice making small decisions on their own, gradually building confidence. Instead of asking a friend which outfit looks better, they can trust their own judgment. Instead of waiting for a coworker's opinion before speaking up in a meeting, they can share their thoughts first. It is also important to challenge the fear of failure. Many people with dependency thinking believe that making a wrong decision is worse than making no decision at all. But mistakes are a natural part of learning and growth. A person can remind themselves that even if they choose wrong, they can adjust and learn from the experience. Instead of avoiding responsibility, they can take ownership, seeing every decision as an opportunity to grow. The more they practice, the easier it becomes to trust themselves. Building independence also involves setting boundaries. People with dependency thinking often feel obligated to agree with others to maintain relationships. They can practice saying no when needed, recognizing that their needs and opinions matter. If they feel pressured to make a choice they do not agree with, they can express their own preference instead of deferring. This might feel uncomfortable at first, but over time, asserting independence strengthens confidence and self-worth. Another way to shift away from dependency thinking is to focus on problem-solving skills. Instead of immediately seeking advice, a person can take time to think through options. They can ask themselves what the possible solutions are and what the likely outcomes might be. If they make a choice and it doesn't work out, they can reflect on what to do differently next time. This process helps build trust in their own decision-making abilities. Developing independence does not mean rejecting help entirely. Seeking support is not the same as dependency. The key difference is whether a person is relying on others out of fear or making use of resources in a healthy way. Asking for input when needed is normal, but it should not replace independent thinking. A person can value advice while still making their own choices. When dependency thinking is addressed, confidence grows. People begin to see themselves as capable and competent. They feel more in control of their lives and less afraid of making mistakes. Relationships improve because they no longer rely on others for constant validation. Work performance improves because they take initiative and trust their abilities. By gradually shifting away from dependency thinking, people open themselves up to new opportunities, stronger relationships, and a greater sense of personal freedom. False happiness expectations make people believe they should always feel happy. They think any sadness or discomfort means something is wrong. This belief sets them up for disappointment. Life includes ups and downs, but false happiness expectations make people feel like they are failing when they experience sadness. A person might wake up feeling off for no clear reason. Instead of accepting it, they panic. They wonder why they are not happy. They think something must be wrong. They start looking for problems. They tell themselves they should be happy because they have a good job, a loving family, or financial stability. This thought process makes them feel worse because now they believe their unhappiness is unjustified. They feel guilty for feeling bad. This belief often comes from childhood messages, media portrayals, and societal expectations. Many people grow up hearing statements like, "Be happy" or "Smile." Adults tell children to be positive and cheerful, but they rarely explain that feeling sad or frustrated is normal. As they grow up, these children internalize the idea that happiness is the default state. They believe anything else means something is broken. Social media reinforces this expectation. People post highlight reels of their lives. They share vacation pictures, celebrations, and accomplishments. They rarely share moments of sadness, boredom, or struggle. A person scrolling through these images sees only joy and success. They compare it to their own life, which includes bad days, failures, and struggles. They start to believe they are different, that they are not as happy as others. They wonder what they are doing wrong. Movies and television also play a role. Many shows depict characters who are mostly happy. When they face challenges, they overcome them quickly. Their problems wrap up neatly by the end of the episode. This portrayal makes real-life struggles feel abnormal. In reality, people experience sadness, frustration, and disappointment regularly. But media creates the illusion that these feelings are rare or unnecessary. This expectation also leads to avoidance. People who believe they should always be happy try to escape negative emotions. They distract themselves with entertainment, work, or socializing. They avoid deep conversations or introspection. Some turn to substances like alcohol or drugs to numb discomfort. Others keep busy to prevent feelings from surfacing. This avoidance creates more stress over time. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They build up and can lead to anxiety or depression. A person might avoid sadness after a breakup. They tell themselves they should not feel bad. They remind themselves that other people have it worse. They force themselves to go out and have fun, but the sadness lingers. They feel disconnected from their friends. They feel exhausted from pretending. Eventually, they break down. Instead of processing the sadness, they have prolonged it. False happiness expectations also affect relationships. A person who believes they should always be happy might expect the same from their partner. They might feel something is wrong with the relationship when they experience boredom or conflict. Instead of working through normal relationship struggles, they think they need to move on. They chase an idealized version of love that does not exist. A couple might start dating and feel intense happiness. Over time, the excitement fades. They settle into routines. One partner feels restless and wonders if something is wrong. They compare their relationship to the early days. They see other couples online who seem happier. They start to believe they have made a mistake. But in reality, long-term relationships include both happiness and routine. False expectations make them feel dissatisfied when nothing is actually wrong. Work can also be affected. A person might believe they should always feel passionate about their job. When they experience stress or frustration, they think they are in the wrong career. They start looking for a new job, believing the right one will bring constant fulfillment. They ignore the fact that all jobs include stress, boredom, and difficult days. This belief keeps them in a cycle of changing careers, always searching for something that does not exist. A worker might start a job they were excited about. At first, they love the new challenges. But after a few months, tasks become repetitive. Deadlines create stress. They no longer feel the same excitement. Instead of seeing this as normal, they assume they need a new job. They leave and start over. The cycle repeats. The expectation of constant happiness also makes people feel isolated. When they struggle, they assume they are alone in their feelings. They do not talk about their problems because they believe others do not have them. They put on a happy face to match what they think is normal. This prevents real connections. If everyone hides their struggles, no one realizes how common they are. A person might struggle with anxiety, but never talk about it. They assume their friends do not feel the same way. They scroll through social media and see everyone appearing happy. They start to believe something is wrong with them. But in reality, many of their friends feel the same way. If they shared their struggles, they would find support and connection. False happiness expectations also lead to burnout. A person who believes they should always be happy might push themselves too hard. They take on too much, trying to achieve a life that matches their idealized vision. They believe success will bring happiness, so they overwork themselves. They ignore exhaustion because they think happiness is just around the corner. When they finally reach their goals, they realize they are still not as happy as they expected. This leads to frustration and exhaustion. A professional might work long hours, thinking a promotion will bring happiness. They sacrifice time with friends and family. They push through stress, believing it will be worth it. When they finally achieve their goal, they feel proud for a moment, but not significantly happier. They set a new goal, thinking the next achievement will do it. The cycle continues, and they never feel fully satisfied. Some people also expect happiness to come from external sources. They believe the right relationship, job, or lifestyle will make them happy. They wait for happiness instead of creating it. They believe their circumstances determine their emotions, so they focus on changing their environment instead of their mindset. This keeps them in a constant state of dissatisfaction. A person might believe moving to a new city will make them happy. They feel restless and assume a fresh start will fix everything. They move, but after a few months, the same feelings return. They realize their unhappiness was not about their location. They start looking for the next thing to change. Breaking free from false happiness expectations requires accepting the full range of emotions. Happiness is part of life, but so are sadness, frustration, and boredom. Emotions fluctuate. They do not indicate failure or success. Recognizing this allows people to experience their feelings without judgment. It helps them navigate life without unrealistic pressure. A person who understands this wakes up feeling off and accepts it. They do not panic or assume something is wrong. They allow themselves to have a quiet day. They acknowledge their feelings without fighting them. They know happiness will return, just as sadness did. They live without the burden of false expectations. Outcome-based worth is the belief that your value as a person depends entirely on your achievements, success, or measurable outcomes. People who fall into this thinking trap tie their self-esteem to what they produce, how much they accomplish, or how well they perform. If they succeed, they feel good about themselves. If they fail or fall short, they see themselves as worthless. This creates a cycle where self-worth rises and falls based on external results rather than internal qualities. A student who bases their worth on grades may believe they are only as good as their latest test score. When they get an A, they feel competent and intelligent. When they get a C, they feel like a failure. Instead of seeing grades as a measure of knowledge at a specific point in time, they see them as proof of whether they matter. This way of thinking makes it hard to recover from setbacks. A single poor grade can lead to thoughts like, "I'm not smart," or "I'll never be successful," even when past successes show otherwise. In the workplace, someone who links their worth to performance might feel confident only when they receive praise, promotions, or recognition. If a project goes well, they feel valuable. If they make a mistake, they feel like they don't belong. Even when they work hard, they may feel uneasy, knowing their confidence could collapse with the next failure. They might avoid risks, fearing that any misstep could damage their sense of self. This way of thinking often begins early in life. A child who gets praised only when they win or achieve might learn that being loved and accepted depends on performance. If they score the winning goal, they get attention and approval. If they miss, they feel ignored or unimportant. Over time, they come to believe that success equals worth and failure equals shame. A person with outcome-based worth may struggle with perfectionism. They believe anything less than perfect is unacceptable because their identity depends on success. This can lead to excessive stress, procrastination, or avoidance. They might refuse to try new things unless they are sure they will excel. They might spend hours refining work, fearing that even a small flaw will make them look incompetent. Instead of seeing mistakes as a natural part of growth, they see them as threats to their identity. This mindset can also create an ongoing sense of dissatisfaction. Achievements provide only temporary relief before the pressure builds again. Someone might graduate with honors, but instead of feeling fulfilled, they immediately worry about landing the perfect job. Once they get the job, they fixate on promotions. No success feels like enough because they always tie their worth to the next achievement. Relationships can suffer when self-worth depends on success. A person who values themselves only when they achieve may expect the same from others. They might struggle to connect with people who don't meet their standards. They might also fear letting others see their struggles, believing that any sign of weakness makes them unworthy of respect. This can lead to isolation, even if they appear successful on the outside. This way of thinking can also create burnout. Someone who constantly chases external validation may push themselves past their limits, ignoring rest and self-care. They might work long hours, take on too many commitments, or struggle to set boundaries. Because they believe their value comes from what they produce, they keep going even when exhausted. Over time, this can lead to physical and emotional exhaustion. Social media can reinforce outcome-based worth. People often showcase their biggest achievements online, creating the illusion that everyone else is succeeding. Someone who already ties their worth to outcomes may compare themselves to these curated highlights. If they don't feel as accomplished, they may assume they are falling behind. They might even hesitate to share their own experiences unless they have something impressive to show. Breaking free from outcome-based worth requires shifting focus from external achievements to internal qualities. This means recognizing that worth is not something earned through success, but something inherent. A person is valuable not because of what they achieve, but because of who they are. This shift allows them to separate identity from performance. They can still strive for success, but failure no longer defines them. Self-awareness plays a key role in overcoming this thinking trap. Someone who notices their tendency to tie worth to outcomes can challenge these thoughts. Instead of saying, "I failed, so I'm worthless," they can reframe it as, "I didn't succeed this time, but that doesn't change my value." They can remind themselves of their strengths, their effort, and the bigger picture. Focusing on intrinsic qualities rather than external achievements can also help. A person can ask themselves what they value beyond success. Are they kind, curious, hardworking, resilient? These qualities exist regardless of whether they win an award, land a promotion, or get perfect grades. Recognizing these traits helps build a more stable sense of self-worth. Learning to appreciate effort rather than just results can also be helpful. Instead of only valuing outcomes, a person can focus on what they put into the process. Did they learn something new? Did they show perseverance? Did they take a risk? By shifting focus from winning or losing to personal growth, they create a healthier mindset. Letting go of perfectionism is another step toward breaking free from outcome-based worth. Accepting that mistakes and setbacks are part of life makes it easier to handle challenges. A person who sees failure as a learning opportunity rather than a threat to their identity can approach life with more confidence. They can take risks, try new things, and grow without fear of losing their sense of self. Connecting with others who value them for who they are rather than what they achieve can reinforce a healthier self-view. Spending time with people who appreciate their character, kindness, or humor can help them see that worth is not tied to success. Genuine relationships provide a sense of belonging that isn't dependent on achievements. Practicing self-compassion is another way to shift away from outcome-based worth. Instead of judging themselves harshly for setbacks, a person can offer themselves the same kindness they would offer a friend. They can remind themselves that no one succeeds all the time and that failure does not make them unworthy. Engaging in activities that have nothing to do with achievement can also help. Creative hobbies, spending time in nature, or simply relaxing without a goal in mind can remind a person that they have value outside of what they produce. Doing things for enjoyment rather than accomplishment creates balance. Recognizing that everyone struggles at times can also ease the pressure. No one wins all the time, and no one is perfect. Accepting this reality helps a person let go of unrealistic expectations. Instead of constantly chasing success to feel worthy, they can find stability in knowing they are enough just as they are. Shifting away from outcome-based worth takes time, but it is possible. With practice, a person can learn to separate self-esteem from external success. They can still set goals and strive for achievements, but they no longer see them as the only measure of their value. Instead of living in constant fear of failure, they can build a more stable, fulfilling sense of self.